Exhibit, you watching Move Faces TV.
Ladies and gentlemen,
the Kids in the Room podcast.
Kids in the Room podcast.
That's right. That's right.
Brought to you by Move Faces TV. Let's go.
Chris, welcome to the pod.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, awesome. Great to have you here. So yeah, it's been an early morning, or a late morning for me, but yeah, it's great to have you here and bring you on the pod. We're gonna talk about some awesome, special stuff today. Yeah, so kick it off. Tell us about yourself. Tell us what's special about you. Let's go. Welcome to the center stage.
Well, I wouldn't say I'm the type to talk about things that are necessarily special about me. I think we're all special and nothing quite makes me special than others. But I will say that one of the things in my life that changed is when I recognized that there are parts of me that are special, just as there are in others. Because I came to a point in my life where I said enough is enough to things that were not positive. And it really changed my life. But just a general background, I'm an East Coast girl. I was born in New York, raised in Jersey. My parents moved me to California when I was in high school. And I did both high school and college in California, but I ended up going back east after because I really missed it. I wanted to go back. But somehow life brought me back. Here I am back in Southern California. But there's been a lot of things on the way, and it's been quite a ride. And I know there's more to come, but yeah, it's been really wild.
Wow, that's crazy. Yeah, I actually used to live in the East Coast too as well. Yeah. It was,
Whereabouts?
Connecticut. Yeah, so I used to live in
Oh,
Connecticut,
gotcha.
New York. So yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Good old Stamford, Connecticut. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great area.
I used to swim in the Cod over in Cape. Yep, Cape Cod.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
Yep,
it's
yep.
beautiful there.
Yeah, awesome stuff. But yeah, and I've done the dance of the back and forth stuff, so that's interesting.
Very.
Yeah. Tell us about your story. I did a lot of ums there, but yeah, definitely tell us about your story. Tell us, how you got here, how you discovered your special gifts, kind of your journey. Let's go.
Well, initially, my background it was in business. I majored in business in college. I was working in the mortgage field. I was doing incredibly well, and just my parents were in finance, so me, walking that path was in no way surprising, and it just made sense. And things changed a little bit when I became a mother. I decided I didn't want to do that work anymore because it was just too stressful, and I did choose to be home with my kids. And this was probably when I started recognizing certain things changing, because I was kind of becoming more awake to the narcissism in my life. Both of my parents are narcissists. They both are on different sides of that spectrum. But it took me some time during this period of becoming a mother myself, finding that things were not really right, quote unquote right. So it took some time, probably about 10 to 12 years of just seeing things in my parents that were no longer okay in my mind. And in many ways, probably were never okay growing up. But when you grow up with something that's your version of normal, so you accept it as okay, or again, it's just acceptable in some way, shape, or form. But I finally hit a point of saying enough is enough. I'm done. And I cut them off. I cut off all contact. And initially, I was terrified because, especially my mother is an extremely vindictive person. So I was just wondering, what is she going to try and do to me? Is she going to try and sue me or try and pull my kids away from me? When you're raised with that kind of environment, just fear is so prevalent. And that was my fear. And I started to go to therapy because that fear had become so overwhelming to me. And it probably took about 1 to 2 years where I was just on this journey of just trying to heal from this fear, understand narcissism to a deeper level, understand how it affected me as an individual and as a mother and as a wife. And during this time, the more I was healing, the more apparently and almost accidentally I was opening up to spirit. So I would start to see people in my mind's eye. So it almost became like this joke, like I see dead people. And I would be talking to someone just like I'm talking to you, and I could see like a grandparent or a friend in spirit right behind them. And I had no idea how to communicate with them. I could see them, but they don't speak like we do. It's a different language and a different form of communication. So I had to learn that. But it just brought me on this whole other journey, all because I finally said no to abuse that I accepted throughout my entire life.
Wait a minute. Let's back this up for a second. So wait, you started hearing or seeing people after you started discovering or rediscovering narcissistic situations between your parents. Is that correct, Connor? Or am I off? Or did I hear
In
something?
a way, I mean, that's ultimately what I felt I was healing from, because, I consider myself a rather grounded individual. In ways I would have said, yeah, sure, I'm spiritual, but I never to the point that I am now. And I was healing my mind. I was healing my body. My diet changed quite a bit. I had healed an autoimmune disease I had. And I just was becoming more centered, more peaceful, because when you're raised in a narcissistic environment, you're in a fight or flight way of being. And learning to calm your nervous system and get out of that way of being does change so much. So when your nervous system starts to calm, it changes everything in you, and especially your brain waves. So, you and I right now, we're communicating at a beta brainwave level. So when communicating to spirit, you have to shift to an alpha or even a theta brainwave. And because of this calming aspect of my healing, my brainwaves were shifting and ultimately healing so that it opened me more.
Okay. Okay. So what are some of the things that you said? Well, first of all, let's take a step back. I want to dig more into this. You mentioned that your parents were, they were narcissistic. What do you feel, diagnosed them, or we'll put them in the lane of, them being narcissistic? And do you have some type of background, some type of study, or somebody saying that they were narcissistic, or you just picked up on these cues that you felt were narcissistic? How did you define that first?
Great question. I think most people, when it comes to narcissism, they understand the grandiose narcissist as, just the definition of what narcissism is. But what a lot of people don't recognize is narcissism is a spectrum. You can be on the covert side of narcissism or the overt side of narcissism. And my dad is an overt narcissist. So he was extremely violent. He is just extremely volatile. The mood would change at the drop of a hat. So because his narcissism was so strong and so obvious, growing up, I always pretty much knew my father was a narcissist, but I didn't recognize that my mother was, because she is, more of that covert, manipulative, quiet, and really works very hard to get people to like her. And a lot of people do. And so I did not see it for a while. I almost kind of woke up to it. And a lot of it was the manipulation and telling me I needed to feel a certain way or I needed to behave a certain way, withholding love, giving me the silent treatment, those kinds of tactics. So I started to recognize a lot of it on my own. And then when I went through my own therapy, my therapist was able to pretty much confirm and validate, and also have her mind blown by many of the stories of what it was to grow up with my parents.
That's interesting. I kind of like, when I look at things like that, I kind of think like, I don't know. I mean, like, my mom was a mental psychologist, growing up. So I literally had, one of my best friends, older brother, she had to commit him, which was like really weird and awkward. But yeah, he tried to stab the principal because he wrote a love letter
Uh-huh.
to this girl and etc. And yeah, it was yeah. Anyways, this would end up happening, and my stepdad was a lawyer, so I kind of heard a lot of these different lingos bounce back and forth towards each other. That was probably different from a normal household. So yeah, I definitely can understand those things. But one thing that I've kind of like always looked, because I am a humanitarian at heart, and I feel that a lot of humans, when it comes to these certain I guess you want to say diagnosis, um, whether we want to call them disabilities or whatever it may be, a lot of humans seem to house a lot of these attributes, whether it's narcissism,
Mhm.
whether it's bipolar. There's a lot of like there's thin lines between a lot of these behavioral things, and a lot of these things can well, I would say a lot of these things people can fully function off of throughout their life, and then there's people who cannot function to where it disrupts everyone's lifestyle that they interact with, and that's when I see like it's probably a problem. But I think like overall, I think a lot of people have multiple so-called disorders, if you will, if they're even a disorder, right? But I think like a lot of people
Yeah.
have these. But I think like whenever it disrupts their daily life, that's when it becomes an issue. When it affects other people. Other than that, I think like everybody has these type of personality traits from all these types of disabilities. OCD and etc. A lot of people are OCD. Just depends on what it is,
Yeah.
right? Just some people are just more extreme. It disrupts their entire lives. A lot of people, if you look at people who are, autistic, a lot of people have autistic attributes. It's just like some people just might have the more extreme where it disrupts their entire life, where some people it doesn't as much. ADD or ADHD now, et cetera, because they've changed it, et cetera. But
Mhm,
those things, a
mhm.
lot of people have those things and they can be triggered. And I think what's interesting is like there was a Stanford professor who came on my pod, and we were talking about this, and it was basically about a lot of things that people end up having as far as like diseases and things like that are usually environmental, typically more than they are, I would say, something they're born with. And there's things that are in each person's DNA that can be triggered by environmental things as they grow and etc. And I think that's interesting. I think there's something to that. I feel like everybody has, from my knowledge too as well, that everybody has these capabilities within them, and it's just like what triggers those things to turn on. It could be life events. It could be food or things like that, or lack of vitamins. Certain things can turn on these things, or people, playing with things they shouldn't probably be playing with that they don't know what they're doing. I've seen those type of things. I just think it's interesting. It's really interesting when we start talking about the human behavior and mental diagnosis and behavioral patterns and how people grow up and how people perceive things. Like for example, I would say a lot of people perceive, how would you say? A lot of people perceive, let's say, some type of possible abuse as abuse, and then another child might not see it as abuse, and then the other one could have totally saw something totally different, right? This
Yeah.
person might saw neglect, and the other person was like, well, I didn't see that. I never felt that neglect. That's just how they were. But how somebody interprets, a parent, or anybody's like, I guess like behavior can be, I don't know. I think I would say probably like a variant range. It's not always just one person's interpretation is the actual fact. There's usually two sides of it, and how we take and absorb things and interact with things matters.
Yeah.
I think you had mentioned something too, like what was it? You said that you had earlier on. You said you had what was it? Autoimmune disease.
Yes.
Typically, there was this book that I was given by a guy years ago, and like, I was just working in this place with my buddy Brandon, and there was this guy named Alex Rodriguez, and he was like, hey, I want to pray with you guys. He would always come, talking to us and stuff. They were like, all right, cool, Alex, that's awesome, thank you. But he gave us this book one time called a brand new way, or heal a brand new way to heal, or something like that. I forgot the name of it exactly. I have it still to this day, but it was about spiritual causes for diseases, and how doctors had aligned that a lot of diseases, or mostly all of the diseases, had some spiritual component. And
I agree.
it had to do also about how people kind of thought. In that, like, and for example, he gave like an example of autoimmune disease, and how autoimmune disease is basically comes from the lower self and has to do a lot with like self-hate or anger at itself. Because basically what happens medically is that your immune system starts attacking itself. And so stress, self-hate, by whatever thought process or feeling that may trigger that, could cause, autoimmune disease. And once that, DNA is triggered and turned on, it's kind of hard to turn it off. It's kind of just packed in there. But I thought that was always interesting, because typically when I have spoken to people who had autoimmune disease, there was always some issue or some energy about their parent, typically the father, the strongest, especially when it was, when I went back and I looked at women who typically had this, it typically was their father that they had the most type of like resentment for whatever reason those may be. And those may be very valid, but some I've seen was just like an interpretation of how that person was. So it's really hard to know unless you're that exact little individual, or you lived in a house and went through that experience. So you pretty much have to just listen what the other person kind of says. But yeah, interesting, Chris. Interesting.
It is really interesting. And I love all these points you're bringing up, because, narcissism is a generational pattern, and not everybody is going to necessarily become a narcissist in this generational pattern, but they will pick up the tendencies. They will, fall into, like you said, we take on these elements, but do they become us? And really, it's a matter of, if it starts affecting other people, and especially if it's affecting other people in a negative manner, is when we have to really have those aspects of being able to be self-reflective and be able to make change. And really, that's kind of the true test in that when it comes to narcissism, because narcissists are really struggle to be self-reflective, to be able to look in the mirror and say, I need to make changes because this isn't right. And even if they don't agree, like maybe they hurt somebody and they don't believe that person should be hurt, you don't get to tell someone how they feel if they were hurt by you, right? It's a matter of being able to be apologetic, to learn better, to do better, but it's a lot of what changed my life and just put me on this path, because, primarily my work is not just narcissism, but it's working with old souls, because there is a connection between old souls and narcissists. And there's change happening in this generation with old souls that are saying, this is changing. I am the change maker. Not every single old soul is going to do this, but there is a choice, there's an option, and there's guidance if we're willing to listen. But it is a very fascinating thing. And I like the examples you bring up, just about how it does come down to certain triggers, how we're predisposed to certain elements, and how we're going to fall into that. There are a lot of things going on spiritually. It's not like a foregone conclusion anymore of what is going to happen. We have many choices and we have many potential paths.
Yeah, that's interesting. Potential paths. Those are always interesting. Yeah. So you believe we have a multiple paths, and they're not predestined?
I believe that. I believe that has shifted. I believe, just in a lot of astrologists tend to talk about this, whereas like years ago, you can map out someone's astrology and pretty much say, this is what you're going to do. This is how it's going to work. But now we can change that. We are change makers now, because we're recognizing that we have this ability and this power, and we're not falling in these patterns in the same way. We're just making so many changes. When it comes to people coming to me for psychic reads, I often am seeing paths, like this is not a single choice. Really is going to depend on your choices. And it's not up to me to tell them what to choose, but I could at least say, okay, these are the paths I see right now for you. And that could change. Paths can change based on choices made. So let's just say, okay, you have these 3 choices and now you've chosen one of them. Now you've shifted things to where you could have created something else. Like, choice is a powerful thing right now.
Yeah, choices are powerful things. So I think even when we're talking about choices and we're talking about life paths, we're talking about, paranormal or psych, or, being psychic energies or psychic paths or fortune telling and things like that. When you're doing these type of things, how do you know for yourself personally that you're talking or you're hearing something from a good energy versus a bad one?
That's a great question. So bad energy, let's just say it's like a negative entity, a negative being, they give off a lower vibration. It's heavier, it's like dense, but they often present themselves as benevolent. So we are taught to ask, are you of the light? And they have to answer. They won't necessarily tell you yes or no, but once you start to get the kind of almost like a sales pitch or something shifts, that's not a being of the light. Whereas when one is, their vibration is so much higher. For me, I could feel it, and it's a sense. This is not to suggest that darker beings don't have the ability to shift vibration and to make you feel a certain way. And I don't want to tell anyone what their own experiences are if they're different from my own. But in my own experiences, I've just had really good understanding of the higher vibration versus the lower vibration and how I connect with that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. And you said something interesting too. You mentioned the light. What does the light mean to you? When you say that word, the light, that's an interesting word, the light. Bring me to light.
I believe it can vary really, because, we're on Earth. It's a planet of duality, dark and light, right? And that's not necessarily, when we go beyond this world, what it is. Or we talk about going into the light when it comes to near-death experiences and being drawn to the light. I believe that it is based on experience. I guess for me, when I think of light beings versus dark beings, I do feel like the vibration, higher vibration versus lower vibration. So that is more my understanding of it. I do believe this is a very human understanding of it, because there are things as humans we are not meant to understand, that it's just not, we are not capable as humans to understand the grand capacity of these deeper, grander meanings.
Yeah. I wonder, in general, when we start thinking about that, is anyone meant to be capable of holding that capacity?
Not as a human. There's been a lot of people that communicate with spirit, communicate with their higher selves, and they're trying to get answers, they're trying to get information. And a very common answer that they have been provided by spirit, by their higher selves, is, I can basically only give you this much because this is what the human mind can take. Because we as humans, we like to understand things. We like for things to make sense. We like answers, but we are also in a very structured environment, a very structured element of society. So it takes time. Think of it when anyone wakes up from something, how there's that cognitive dissonance of, no, that can't be true. And, oh, that can't be possible. So what if some being has given us this wallop of information that the cognitive dissonance is too great, that it can make us actually go insane? That concept of alone fascinates me, of, wow, it's just too grand for the human mind. Part of it is because of how we're conditioned. a big part of it. So shed away some of that conditioning, which a lot of us are doing, and more of us are open to the meanings and the understandings. And those that are less open are probably going to look at us like we're a little crazy. And that's fine. You know, it's all speculative, really. But yeah, it is just such a fascinating thing to me to think that, wow, there are so many things that we're not going to understand until we move on beyond this lifetime.
Yeah, that's interesting. Very interesting. Yeah. I think like I remember like I was I was in this boy band, originally before I actually came out to California. And I literally was I was watching this I was up one night with my roommate, Brandon, and I saw like this like I don't know, I was like, I feel like God's got something to say to me one night, and it was totally ironic and funny. And he's like, "All right, T, I'm going to sleep, bro." I was like, "All right, bro, whatever. I just feel like I got this energy, dude." He's like, "All right, man, your energy, whatever." And so like I sat down on the couch, and then I clicked on the TV, and there was this guy, and he said, "Hey, I have a prophecy to tell you, and it's about your future. Call me now." And I was like, "What the hell?" He said, "God has something for you." I was like, "What, dude?"
Wow.
What is the irony of that? And so like I was like,
Yeah.
I gotta call this thing. And so I literally called this number just out of curiosity. I was like, come on, what are the chances? I just
Yeah.
told that to Brandon. I just, put on his glasses and said, whatever, dude. And closed the door. Yeah. Anyway, so I'd literally called it, and the creepiest thing I never forget is that when I called the number, and when I dialed it, it said leave your voice message or something else like that, or leave your mailing address or your phone number or something like that, and they'll call you back or something like that. And I was like, all right, okay, why would this? All right, cool, whatever. And the weirdest thing that I ever remember was that when I did this, I heard like a whisper over my right or left ear. I can't remember exactly, because I went in my bathroom because I didn't want to be loud, because I didn't want to wake up Brandon in his room. And so I went in my bathroom, which is on the opposite side with my own room and bathroom. And I went there, and I was like, I called, and I heard a whisper say California. And I was just like, what the
Oh,
hell?
wow.
And I was like, that is the creepiest shit I ever heard in my life. And I was like, why did I hear that? Is this like in my subconscious or what? And I told my roomie the next day, I was like, hey, dude, I remember I went to sleep and blah, blah, and et cetera. I called this number, dude, and this happened, blah, blah, blah. I know it sounds crazy and weird. And yeah. And he was like, what? I was like, yeah. And then like randomly, what ended up happening is this guy or whatever sent these books, and then it was like, oh, buy these books and you can read these ways of thinking or something else like that. And I was like, all right, cool. And this sounds like somebody scamming something. I was like, nah, I'm good, dude. And then secretly Brandon purchased them.
Oh, wow.
And yeah. And then like I literally had once he had purchased them, I read like probably two chapters of the book, and I was like, oh, this is super crazy interesting. And I went to sleep one day after we were, practicing for, this band that we had. And we were practicing for tour. And I literally was tired and exhausted, and I lay down and I fell asleep like I was laying on lying on a bed of clouds, if you will.
Mhm.
And then I had this dream, and it was just me in the middle of darkness. It was just pure silence and just blackness. And then I was just like a little light just started coming towards me. And it was the brightest light because everything was completely silent. Everything was so peaceful, and everything was just like, I don't know, it was nothingness. It was weird, creepy, but it was just like peaceful in a weird way, which is odd.
Yeah.
And there was just like this little light, and the light got closer and closer and closer. At first it started off very small, and then it just got closer and closer and closer to me, almost like a little sun. And then when I got right next to me, I was like, my eyes, I could not really, I was trying to visualize and look at it. It was so bright. And then when I got closer, it was my fucking face. I was like, what the hell?
Oh, wow.
And I was just like, what the hell? I was just like in shock, like, what the hell is going on? But literally, I knew that I was in some type of dream, right? I knew it, which was crazy. I never had a dream that I knew that I was dreaming or in some type of
Yeah.
state. And literally, it was myself telling myself, doesn't make any freaking sense, that,
Does to me.
I'm going to tell you something about your future.
Yeah.
And, and kind of told me some stuff and then kind of said, you're going to be in California and you're going to be building some things. And I was like, okay, yeah, all right. And
Wow.
I took it as like, I'm going to wake up and this is it. And then at the end of the dream, it was, myself in this light, quote unquote, basically said, hey, you need to promise me one thing when you wake up. And I was like, all right, and it said, you have to promise me just to start. Just start. Whenever you wake up, just promise me to start. I know you,
Love
and you're
that.
not going to do it. Just start. And I was like, hell, okay. Like literally. So I literally
love
woke
that.
up and I told my roomie, Brandon, this, and he was like, what the heck? And I started looking up the things that I had in the dream, and I was like, I couldn't find those things. They didn't exist. And start calling a bunch of companies and start calling some things. And needless to say, randomly, if you will, we ended up in California, and I ended up eventually somehow working in tech, which was really weird, and yeah, so I think that was always a weird thing. But so when you mentioned the light, I always remember that scenario because I hear people talking about that before in the past. I was like, what the hell are they talking about, the light? That sounds weird to me and odd, and maybe a little bit, what light, what does that mean? And so like for me, after that, I always had a reference of some type of light. And then when I created the podcast, I did the podcast with like, these I wanted to, have this like higher point of thinking with the pyramids, aliens, futuristic things to, kind of like, I don't know, express like free thinking, right? To express free thinking, a place of free thinking. And what the irony of that is, like, I did this rando DNA test, and then it came back that my paternal ancestor was King Ramses III. And I was like, what the hell? And so I thought that was pretty interesting. So I was like, whoa, that's pretty rad. Like, what are the chances?
Yeah.
So yeah. So I thought that was interesting. But yeah, I don't know. I think like, when you start talking about things like, I don't know, I think kind of where this conversation is going, when you start talking about things like, the paranormal, spiritual or energy and these type of things, I always find those things very fascinating. And I feel like there's just some people that are aware of certain things more than others, and there's some people that are not. And then there's just some people who I think they're having some, hallucinations. I believe that. I don't think everything is somewhat real, but I think everything has some type of way to possibly be explained in some form, but maybe not as easy to digest for every single person, or maybe some things just don't really make sense. But I do think some people just like are making up some things as well. But kind of like you hear those people who say they've seen aliens, and it's just like, some people I believe possibly have, and I think some people probably didn't. I think some people just had some type of hallucination or whatever it may be.
I agree.
But that's another story. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's all interesting, the whole spirituality thing. Have you ever played with like things like a Ouija board?
No, I am rather against the Ouija board because when you start touching the Ouija board, you open yourself up to everything. And usually you're inviting the dark in on that.
That is interesting.
So I do not recommend that. I don't recommend the Ouija board.
Yeah,
I mean, yeah, it's just I've never heard anyone have like a truly horrible experience, but I've also not heard a lot of positive ones either. I do teach spiritual development classes, and I do just kind of say, hey, I don't recommend this. Always, just trust your gut. Trust your gut.
Yeah, I remember when I was a teenager, I was laughing, about the whole Ouija board stuff. I thought it was ridiculous. It was like, I wouldn't play with that shit, but it's hilarious. Like, I don't really believe in it. And I remember my friend's mom, we were at her house, and she told us this bizarre story. who she just was not like a spiritual woman. She wasn't a person who was super religious or anything else like that. So it was just weird to hear her have any type of spiritual conviction, if you will. And I was just like, all right, cool. She's what? All right. She's scared or something like this. This is weird. I was like, whatever. And she told us this long story about our Ouija, and I was just like, yeah, I don't really believe in that. And I just thought she was making it up, to be honest with you. And I remember one time, me and my buddy, we had a common friend, and she had called us. She said, hey, we're hanging out at our house. We have this like Ouija board. I was like, Ouija board? Nobody's playing with that. I saw those some scary movies. It's probably not cool to play with that. But there was this girl that I liked at the time. So I was like, you know what? Let's just go over there and hang out. I don't believe in Ouija boards. So it is whatever. And we literally all went over there just to hang out innocently. We weren't really trying to play with any Ouija or anything else like that, you know. And we went over there, and she's, oh, let's just play. And I was like, whatever, dude. It's fake anyways. It's just a toy you bought from Walmart. And I remember she was, they were doing this thing, and they said to put your hand on this, and I was like, whatever, dude. And I remember we did it, and like the lights went out, and then her mom came and clicked on the lights, said, hey, why are you guys turning the lights off? And we were like, well, we didn't turn on the lights. We didn't turn off the lights. We were all sitting here. And she was like, well, you know, if your dad comes in here and sees you guys out there, and there's boys in there, you guys are all outside playing with a Ouija. I mean, all outside with guys, your dad might get the wrong signal, and you'll be in trouble. And she was like, yeah, but we didn't turn it off, Mom. And I was like, who the hell turned the light off? Did your mom do that to scare us, or like what the hell happened? And I just remember that day was like totally weird out, because like I remember like it was just like, I remember we were asking like, who do we, because it was something like I forgot what it was years ago. But she basically asked, like, who do you want to speak to, or something like that, or who would you want to talk to, or something like that. I think everybody ended up, after it happened, we all asked, like, who, and it was the same name for every single person.
Oh, wow.
Like, what the hell? Everybody wanted to speak to that same exact person. That's
Wow.
creepy. Yeah.
Can't make
So
that up.
I don't do the whole, Ouija or any of those type of things as much, because, well, not as much at all, because of those things, like, pretty creepy. Yeah. I literally, my
it can
friend,
be creepy.
yeah, he literally, went weird the next day. And the other guy who drove us there, because he was the only kid with a driver's license, the next day, I went to go ask him when anything weird happened. And then his sister said, yeah, he's never coming back here again. Like, we're moving him to like Georgia or something like that. And so, yeah. I was like, well, what happened? She's like, I don't know. Just some weird stuff.
That's Ouija.
Yeah. So it was just like bad vibes. I was like, what the
bad
hell?
vibes.
Like, is Ouija weird? I mean, something's weird's going on, but yeah. So my other
It's a
friend ended up-
consistent story. Yeah, that's the kind of Ouija stories. It's just it's that kind of energy. So the stories may vary, but the energy of the story is consistent.
Right. It's never good.
No, it's not. It's not.
Right.
No.
But it's just, I don't know. I think I thought it was like a silly joke, because it was like something you buy from like a regular store. It's like, come on, what is that? It's like a toy. It's like buying Monopoly. Like, how could that really be doing things? But as I understood, is like sometimes when you're playing with things and you're calling on things, it still kind of replicates the same form.
Well, you're setting an intention. It's really about the intention. And the more people you have, that you have multiple people with the same intention of connecting with beyond, it strengthens the connection. And when you're working with Ouija, it's again, like I said, it can open you to anything. It's like opening a portal, but there's no boundaries.
Yeah, a portal. Sounds scary. Sounds almost like a one of those memes going around on TikTok or something.
Because it does, yeah.
Cutting up a portal when he was a kid. I would love to bring Elon on and ask him, did he really do that? But yeah, that's another story.
That would be a fascinating conversation, but I don't think Elon would tell you all he knows. He can't.
Yeah, I would. I don't know. I would probably say the same thing. I probably might be on that side that he probably wouldn't want to say that. If he said that, it'd be game over for everyone. People would be freaked out.
Yeah, that's what it is. It's kind of like I said, when you work along the lines of cognitive dissonance, you can only say as much as people are willing to believe. before they write you off as crazy or some other thing.
That's very true. Yeah, I see that very true. I think cognitive dissonance is a huge thing. I think a lot of people do
Especially
that,
for someone like that who's highly intelligent, right? So already some of the things he says, people will just kind of nod and smile because they're like, okay, well, he's brilliant, so it must be true, right? But what if he says something that's just so grandiose that the basic mind can't comprehend? They're either going to think they're stupid or need to write him off as super smart or somewhat crazy to make themselves feel better. It's human nature. But he'd still be a fascinating guest. I say go for it. Get him. See what he says.
That'd be awesome. Yeah. I mean, I think I would ask him questions different from a lot of other people would ask, because I think most people will typically have like a certain background where it's just like one type of background, and so the questions are, kind of stuck in a certain hole.
You're right.
Shifted towards tech or shifted towards politics. It's never really spirituality. It's never really bouncing it off with tech. It's never bouncing it off of the entertainment industry. It's never bouncing it off of moral things. It's just morally just politics or tech. Those are the two main sides of interviews that he typically gets. It's these moral ones versus these, what are you building? Are you going to Mars? Is that the right thing to do? Is that ethical? Versus is it moral to believe the things that you do politically, etc. Those are interesting, but I think they're typical. I agree. But that would be cool. That would be cool. Yeah.
It would.
I mean, yeah, that's interesting. But back to where we're at. I think it's really interesting. When you said that you personally started seeing people, what does that mean? You started seeing people? Were these like physical creatures that you started seeing that were physical to your eyes, or were they just like outlines? What does that mean to you? Like, if you had to describe it to people.
Well, I mean, every time people say, "Oh, I saw someone and they were not alive," they very likely envision what Hollywood has shown in movies, TV, whatever. That's not how it works. It is so incredibly subtle. It is in the mind's eye. This does not mean that some people cannot see with their physical eyes. It's just not how I see, and that is not how my clairvoyance works. I am also not predominantly clairvoyant. That is not my strongest clair. My strongest clair is clairsentience, and that's all like, inner feelings, gut feelings. I could call out a lie. I could call out the energy of a person, read the energy of a person. So seeing people was, for me, so surprising because I knew I had a good gut read on people. I had done it my whole life. I had not seen people in spirit in my mind. And that's really a lot of what we have to learn when we are developing as psychics or as mediums, depending on, your path. And it's understanding what's being shown to you. Is it popping into your mind because you're thinking of it, or is it being shown to you? So it's the question of, is this coming to me or from me? And learning the difference of the energy. And like I said, the energy differences are so incredibly subtle and can be very quiet. But the more we learn to listen and train in that, the more we understand, and then can be able to understand any messages that are trying to come across, and for me, it was just kind of fascinating to me because I also recognized when I was seeing people in spirit, it was for someone I was able to tell at the time. Because think of how random that is. If I'm just having a conversation with someone and all of a sudden I'm like, hey, do you by any chance have a grandparent that spoke 2 languages? I feel like the other one is Spanish, and he's kind of tall and thin, salt and pepper hair, and oh my gosh, that's my mom's dad. And just someone that was so open to it, and it's still shocked, like, how do you know that? And I'm like, oh, well, I actually see him standing behind you. Like, they'd look behind, like, no, not like that. It's in my head. So like I said in the beginning, you just don't understand. I didn't understand, and I needed to figure that out. So that's when I started taking spiritual development classes and just learning how that worked and what I was being shown and why, and just learning about the clairs and and ultimately it led me to teach people to do it themselves because, predominantly my work is spiritual counseling. I help people heal their energy from trauma, childhood traumas, narcissistic trauma, whatever the case may be. But I noticed the more these people were healing, the more they were opening up to spirit, just like I did. And I didn't know what to do at first. So I like the fact that I could help people find those steps along the way so they're not just figuring it all out on their own as I did. The internet helps. It's a beautiful thing, but it's also, what do I do next? And I just really had to trust that and trust where it guided me.
Yeah, I feel like after 9/11, I mean, not 9/11, excuse me, moving far back before time. But I feel like after, the pandemic,
Yeah.
2020, I feel like a lot of people were on this whole spiritual, supernatural kick.
Yeah.
And, it kind of really just kicked in right then. I was talking to a buddy of mine named Michael, and we were talking about some of this stuff like this. And we were talking about past lives, all stuff like that. Things that are interesting to talk about. And I remember I was talking about these type of things. And then like he was super excited because he was like, yeah, there's this woman, Dolores Cannon, and etc. and blah blah blah. And he said, I read this book, and she said something like this and this and this, and I was like, oh cool. Well, I don't know what that is, but awesome. And then like I remember like after that he started like this TikTok, and he got like 1 million followers now. And I was like, all right, cool. All right, cool, Mike, cool. And it was what was interesting about it is he wasn't talking about it prior. He was
It
talking
is
about more
interesting.
techie stuff or some other type of like, he was doing like these retreats, but he wasn't talking about like reincarnation, things like that. But obviously he had read like a book previously. And so when I brought it up, I guess it like triggered something else in him. And I think it just like turned on that car signal. I've noticed that sometimes, and I'm not taking, credit for anything, but I've noticed in my life that I've had this weird timing to just like mention something to somebody, and then they just like take off, and you're like, what the hell?
Yeah.
Like, well, how the hell did that help? Like, what? Where was that for me? Because like,
Yeah, take credit though. That's part of what you're clearly supposed to do that though. So take credit. You just a little, doesn't have to be all ego. Just a little like, yeah, I see where I served a place in that. And
well,
that's
I
neat.
don't know about that specific scenario. I just know like right after that it kicked in, and it like
That's
started.
usually
I was
how
like,
it
what the
works.
hell?
That's how it
And
works.
yeah, and I've seen that like consistently happen throughout my life with random
Yeah.
people that I've interacted with. And I'm like, how the
That
hell
won't
did
stop. That won't stop. You'll just notice it more and you'll recognize it. Like you'll recognize the pattern. And you probably just have a little chuckle at it. Like, yep, I can understand how that worked.
Yeah, I don't think I have a chuckle. I kind of like, what the hell's going on? Like, where's my,
You'll get there.
where's my,
Well,
where's my laughing point? Yeah, this is crazy. Like, it's like, these are like,
well, because
these are
now
like
it's probably still
phenomenal changes
surreal.
in
Like, why
people's-
is this happening?
yeah, it's like, these are like phenomenal changes in these people's
Yeah.
lives. And it's like, and I'm not saying they're I don't, want them to be bad, but they're great and they're amazing and they're awesome people. But like, these are people who might have been wandering for a while. And then they found this one thing off of a conversation, and it just triggered them to do something else. And it was something that might have been like their interest, but they didn't really have maybe the signal to kind of just like, you know what? Why don't I do this? Like I literally called this one other guy too as well. I called him up. I said, hey, I'm starting this podcast up. You should come on my podcast. And I didn't hear from the guy for a while. And next thing I know, he went on this other podcast, and it was a podcast that was in the industry that he was in, and he never contacted me back. And I was like, whatever happened to him? And next thing I'm like, well, how did you get in this other podcast? And from what I assume from putting the pieces together, it's probably what happened is after I messaged him, it triggered a thought in his mind. Well, wait a minute, he has something here. Why don't I go on podcasts with all this knowledge that I know and contact these people who have one within this sector, and then come on there? And he got like a guest spot, and now he just makes millions off of it. And I'm like, what the hell? And
well, you know what that is, though? It really sounds like you serve as a guide.
Yeah, I don't know what I'm serving as.
Well, because guides plant seeds, guides aren't like I'm talking from a spiritual level, an energy level, but also a human level. You're a seed planter, but that those seeds that are planted as they begin to grow, or not even as the germination process, trigger something, and that's guidance. So you are serving as that type of guide. It's you'll get to the chuckle when you can recognize the energy of that more and your place in it, because now it's still in that surreal weirdness of like, why does that happen? Why does that keep happening? And I've noticed the pattern. So it's good you recognize the pattern, because like I said, that's not going to change. That's not going to stop, and probably is going to enhance more and more. And you'll notice yourself just kind of in your mind, these ideas are popping into your head about people and where they should probably be going or what they're going to be doing next, because that is your guide energy guiding you to guide them.
It's actually creepy because it's actually true.
That's
That's actually true because it's actually something that I find annoying about my personality or energy. I don't really like doing that, because what I found like earlier on in my life is that some people may have not liked me just like intruding.
Yep.
Like, what do you like, why are you looking at me? Like, what are you doing? Like, what's the matter? Like, what is he thinking? I'm like, nothing, just like whatever. Because I mean, like when I learned like in high school to kind of turn some things off, because I noticed that there was this cognitive dissonance of whenever I said something, and it highlighted with people, and it resonated with people so strongly that it either made them super weirded out or just made them really mad. Or
I can understand that.
Or they just like resented me for something, like, how did you know that? Or how did you feel that? And then like, who are you to mention that? Like that truth was just like creepy for them, or just overwhelming that they didn't know that for themselves. They weren't aware of that themselves. Their self-awareness was not there. And so it begins to be like, and then sometimes that self-awareness might be too self-aware of that other individual, that it just may, make them upset. It might make them upset because they're like, oh, well, who are you to be, it's a cognitive dissonance there. But yeah, I think there's something there. There's something there. I don't know what it is. I try to think about those things, and it's just like always, it's interesting. It's interesting. One weird thing happened is like, this was like 2020 or 2021, around that time, like 2020 or 2021 of like July. I was literally with a couple of friends, and this was during the pandemic, and we went out to this place called Santana Row in the Northern California region. And, not many places were open. We were all hanging out at the only place that we could all hang out and talk as guys and laugh. And it was about 8 or 11 of us, roughly. And we were sitting down there having dinner and laughing and making jokes, because it was the only time we could have that social time, because everybody was on lockdown, or we're just getting out, and they had that halfway open thing. And I remember we were sitting there, and we were having the best times of our lives this one time. And we were walking back, and as we were walking back, I remember, excuse me, that was the energy there. But I remember we were walking back, and I was like, hey, did everybody park their car, this way? And there was like, yeah, we all parked this way. And I was like, all right, cool, that's awesome. But I've got to go this way because I parked way back there. So I'm going to go to my car. It was good to hang out with everybody. Let's do this next Friday. Have a great time. All right, cool. It was awesome, actually. Really cool, man. We had a really good time. All right, cool. Started walking back, turned around, started walking back. Probably got about like 4 feet. And I don't know. I don't know why it's weird, but I heard this weird whisper right here in the same freaking ear. And I haven't had this since like years before, when I told you before I came to California. And I was like, and there was only 2 times I've ever had that in my entire life, which is creepy. But I heard this whisper says, ask John if he needs a ride. It was just like a whisper, ask John if he needs a ride. And I was like, what the hell is that? And I didn't question it. I just turned around and I said, hey, anybody need a ride? And John turned around. And I said, John, "You need a ride, bro?" He looked down and he looked up and he shook his head. He said, "Hey, I'm riding with T." And he turned back around, walked with me, and he was like, "Hey, T, can you drop me off at the McDonald's? I'm kind of hungry." I was like, "Yeah, man, I got you, dude. No worries." And, as we started walking, another one of his friends came up to him and said, "Hey, wait, John, I need my keys out of your car. So I need you to go back to your car and get those keys."
Mhm.
And I was like, "What the hell is going on?" Like, I'm
Yeah.
just turning around. Why they're trying to pull him back? I was like, and he kept on like, he's like, no, John, we need to go back to your car. I need my keys. They're out of your car. John
Oh,
says,
wow.
"Nah, F off." He's like, "Whatever. Don't worry about it." And he was like, he was like, "No, but John, I can't open the store tomorrow without my keys and they're in your car. So we need to go back to your car because I need my keys." And he followed us like as we were walking. And I was like, "Oh my God, dude, seriously?" And he's like, I was like, "Hey," I said, "Well, maybe we can just like go back to the car, get the keys, give it to him, and let's walk back. I'll drop off at McDonald's. You get home, everything be cool, and call it a night." And John's like, "Yeah, whatever, dude. Let's just do it." So we walked back, got back, started talking, and this other kid, Neff, had got this brand new Audi, and all of a sudden, as there's a security guard, and it's like truck drives by, he's like, "Hey, you guys have to be out of here because COVID restrictions. After a certain period of time, you guys need to be out in the parking lot. We can't have any, people here." And we're like, "All right, cool. So we got to go." So I was like, "All right, let's go." I said, "All right, I'm leaving." And then I was like, "Hey, John, let's go." John's like, "Oh, well, I'm leaving with Neff." I was like, "You're leaving with Neff? What? All right. Okay. Are you coming with me?" He's like, "No, I'm going to ride with Neff." I said, "Are you sure?" And then his other buddies are like, "Oh, why are you going with Neff?" He's like, "I'm going to go to Santa Cruz." It's like almost 1:30. Why would you go to, or 1 o'clock, whatever. Why would you go to Santa Cruz? He's like, "Yeah, we're going to follow some girls, whatever." And we're like, "Okay." John doesn't. All right, whatever. So I was like, "All right, well, are you coming with me or not?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'm going to ride with Neff." And I said, "Okay." And I turned around, went to do my thing near a bush, and then kept on walking, drove back home, and then I went to sleep. And then when I woke up, I clicked my phone up. Next thing I know, there's text messages going bing, 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 bing. I was like, "What the hell is all this shit?" I was like, "What the hell? Oh my God." And I was like, "Oh, I had irritable sleep." And then I look at my phone and I start looking at all these messages like, "Oh my God, T. Oh my God. What the hell happened last night?" And everybody's like, "Oh my God, T, did you see what happened? Oh my God, this sucks. Can you believe it?" I was like, "What the hell's going on here?" He's like, "What? I don't feel weird. It feels weird." Next thing I know, they're like,
Yeah.
"Oh," I start reading the message. It says, "Dude, call me, T, call me." Everybody's like saying, "Call me, call me." What the hell happened? John died last night. I was like,
Mm.
"What?" It was like, "That's crazy." It was like, "Yeah, dude, what the hell? John died last night." I was like, "That's crazy." And so it was really weird because I was like, "That is insane. He died last night."
Yeah.
So that's weird. So by the time I reached home is when he actually was passing. And he shared this like Instagram story or whatever or not of his last moments. And he was like taking his phone. He was filming the road or he was driving and he was
Wow.
laughing. And then everyone was like, "Hey man, T, we went, I mean, this is probably a couple of days after they went to go see or whatever, but supposedly he hit like the other guy was driving and he had the nice new car or whatever. He hit like there was a roundabout, driving really fast. He hits a rock and supposedly I guess it goes far in the air, like 8 feet. John flies out the car and supposedly they went up there to go see him. And the cop was randomly there and they said, the cop said he would have lived if he would have had the seatbelt on, most likely. But he wasn't wearing a seatbelt. And that's crazy. And everyone's like, "Dude, T, you remember you always telling John to put on your seatbelt?"
Mm-hmm.
And I looked back at this weird, airy text message we had probably 3 months prior. And he was like, "Hey, this whole COVID thing's a joke. We're going to laugh about this next year. And it's just going to be funny. We're all just going to be laughing." And I text messaged him. I said, "Some of us will." And I was like,
Oh,
that's kind
wow.
of creepy. Like, what is this message? What is this message? I was like, this is not cool. Like, what is it? Like, why is this message here? And I was like, that's creeped out. And everybody was like, hey, man, I remember you told John to go with you, man. He should have left with you that night. And I was like, well,
Yeah.
you know, I did, but you guys, you know, that was crazy. And so we went to his funeral. It was really depressing. His mom was crying which was, you know, obvious. You should.
Yeah.
And it was just like creepy. And then I remember literally probably a week after that, I had randomly was watching TV, and then, you know, with my Amazon, you know, I have the Amazon like Prime Video thing, whatever it is you have on your TV. And I remember my TV was just shut off, and everybody would be like, "What the hell?" I was like, "Dude, why is our TV turn it back on?" And randomly watching, and it would just shut off. And I was like, and then I would hear like towards my podcasting studio right here, I would hear something knock down. And it was like, what's that? What's in there? I was like, all right, I heard something knock down. I'm like, that's creepy. And yeah, that was creepy. That was creepy. So that is one weird scenario too, as well, where I feel like sometimes there's like these weird energies or these weird things that you can't explain. And for me, I could never explain that type of thing. But like, you know, I don't know. It's interesting. It's interesting to see those type of things. Yeah.
Well,
rest in peace.
One thing too, I mean, just kind of for your information, because when you talk about how you get messages, usually when a message comes to your right ear, it is someone that is beyond this plane. If it's coming from the left, someone is still here. So that would be someone, say, like in a coma. That's usually how it comes to me. So when you say like I would hear this and it would come to this ear, and that could be, I mean, anyone that is willing and able. So someone in spirit, angel, a guide. That's usually, you know, when we are aware. I don't know if that's the best word, but because you know, they could also come to us when we're asleep. So obviously, the conscious mind is not what it is when we're awake. But you definitely sound very intuitive, and that spirit does speak to you. And you know, like it sounds like in this case, you know, John probably went before his time because someone tried to interject with that, because the powers that be, they are not allowed to get in the way of free will. So John had a choice, and you know, they did what they could. You always hear these stories of people that say, like, you know, they were about to take a bunch of pills and then their phone rang, or you know, they were about to do something and something happened, and they can never forget those moments. Those are usually you know, our spirit teams coming in and trying to help, trying to shift something to keep us in line with our contract as best as they can. And you know, that's such an interesting story, because it shows how, you know, in some cases you can only do so much. You know, you couldn't, what were you going to do, yank John into your car? No. But it's a really interesting story. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, it's really true, and it's deep as well. But I think, like, you know, you know, I don't know. I would have these. I think when John was, you know, when he was alive, he would always say, "You always have these feelings." I was like, these bad feelings. I'm like, dude, I only get a bad feeling when I feel like something's gonna happen. I said, does it happen, dude? And he's like, whatever. And so I'm like, like, I mean, like, literally, I remember another time where I told my friend, I said, hey, look, I have a bad feeling. My friend Patrick was like, hey, I have a bad feeling. We need to leave away from John. I said, let's go. As soon as he turns his back, I said, something doesn't feel right. I said, he's going to cause a situation. And I said, let's go. And literally the next day, he has a cast in his leg. He was like, what happened?
Oh, well.
Like, well, last night, I don't know, something happened. I can't remember. I was like, what? So, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know, you know, why certain things may happen, or if it's this or if it's that. You know, I'm always skeptical of my own self or of certain things. But when I see a pattern, something weird happens, and it happens that correlates behind that, it's just like, and other people have seen it, not just me. So it's like, but then it's kind of creepy at that point, because it's like, well, what is really going on? Like, what the hell, you know, like, or what in the world? I don't know. I think it makes you feel a little bit, I don't know. I think maybe what's the word I'm looking for? I think it can make you feel a little bit maybe different in some weird way. So you might want to push yourself away from that energy,
Yeah.
of like why, and then you want to be self-critical because I'm really analytical. So I'm like, well, maybe that's not that. Maybe it was just something random. Maybe it just happened. Maybe I could be reading into it so much. So I typically try to drop it, but
Mhm.
when there's so many other people who've seen it and had the same conversation and mentioned these things, it's just kind of creepy and weird. And the weirdest thing, we all took this picture that night, and the guy who was driving, we all took this picture, and obviously I have this picture too, and they all post this picture because it was the last picture we all took together.
Yeah.
And the guy that was driving was a guy named Neff, and this kid was younger. He literally turned just 21, and he just got a brand new Audi. And in the photo, he's doing like this over John's head, and
Wow.
John's pointing back at me.
Wow.
And I'm like, what? I said, do you guys not find this a little bit creepy about this?
That
Not
is
trying to
creepy.
be Mr. Creepy or Mr. Ironic, but like, isn't it weird that Neff is holding up this dark sign over John's, kind of head, and then
Yeah.
John's pointing back at me and smiling, and I'm like, what the hell's going on here? This is kind of a creepy photo. And that kid Neff, I think he ended up going to jail. So his life is pretty much gone because he did have a little bit of alcohol in his system, and John passed away for that. So I think he ended up getting manslaughter from what I understand.
Vehicular manslaughter.
But I think he did, and it's sad because the kid, he had some issues with his father and stuff like that. But he just got a brand new Audi. It was not a good scenario. But things happen for whatever reasons they may be. But I do think it's interesting. I think the paranormal world is interesting. I'm not sure if I believe one way or the other. I just think there's weird things. There's something there. There's things that happen in this world that I think maybe some people can't explain, and some people may feel like they can, and some people may be more in tune with it. It could be something that could be just random. It could be something that's ironic. But some things I don't believe. If I see, I'm really analytical. So when I see patterns, if I recognize a pattern, then I'm like, I don't know, there's something there. I don't know what it is. I don't know if this is some guide or if somebody's doing this or there's something special or this is weird. Maybe I could just be making this up. But when I see certain events that are catastrophic or even great happen from these situations or these things that I said something prior, it definitely makes you wonder, like, well, what's going on, And I think when I was a kid, and and I know you mentioned earlier too as well, and this is kind of maybe off pace, but a little bit off pace, on pace to a certain point. But you had mentioned something about narcissism and old souls, and one thing that I guess you would say that strikes something for me is when you said old souls with narcissism. And I remember being a kid, and all these old people would come up to me and say, "You're an old soul." And I'm like, what the hell does that mean? I'm just a fucking kid. How am I an old soul? Like they would talk to me and it was like, "You're an old soul." I'm like, what the hell does that mean? Why do you old people keep on telling me I'm an old soul? Obviously I'm young. I'm like a kid. I'm playing with toys. Like, what are you talking about, an old soul? But I always had this thing where I would, my entire life where I would talk to older people and just have a conversation with them. And then I guess they were intrigued from what may seem of the conversation that I was keeping with them and the things that I was saying back to them. So they would always say, "You're an old soul." And I'm like, okay, well, that's creepy. Like, stop saying that. Like, why do random old people tell me that? Like, that's really weird. Yeah. Really interesting. So hopefully I'm not.
That's usually how
old soul.
That's usually how old souls tend to find out, though. Someone will tell them. And it, again, that goes down to that planting the seed. You were meant to hear that, and not that you need to do anything with it, but you were meant to hear that, and you were meant to hear it more than once, more than twice, more than 3 times even, because it was meant for you to embody that. And that happens so much with old soul children. because they have a different kind of energy. They have a different kind of way about them, a different kind of feel. And, older people can spot it because they can pretty much carry on a conversation with an old soul child as they would any other adult, and maybe even a little better sometimes. It's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think I just didn't like it. I was like, why do you random people keep on calling me this old soul? Like, I'm not an old soul. I'm like a young, I don't know I'm just a guy. I'm just a kid. Like, I'm not an old soul, and it would creep me out, definitely. I really
It's hard to
didn't like
make
the
sense
whole
of.
old soul thing. Maybe the old part creeped me out. Like, old? Like, what do you mean old? I'm a kid.
Yeah,
I'm young.
that's understandable. Who wants to hear they're old?
Yeah. But I did hear it a lot. The majority of my life from random older adults, and and I would just take it as like, the way that I used to try to take it was like, well, maybe they're saying that because I'm choosing to speak with them and I can hang and conversate with them. They didn't see that typically with people my age, where I could just hang out with old people and laugh and talk to them and tell them stuff. And
Yeah,
this kid,
that's how old souls work.
But yeah, I don't know. I think it's interesting. But I think when we're talking about, I want to go back on this right here because, you mentioned a lot of cool stuff, or interesting stuff too, as well, is that you started seeing people. I know there's this one guy, I think I've seen him on, I think I've seen him like on TV or something like that, or Netflix or something, Tanner or something like that. I forgot his name. And he kind of goes around. He's like a medium or something like that.
Mhm.
And he's got blonde hair, and he
Tyler Henry?
goes around there you go, that guy.
Yeah. I know who you're
I've
talking
seen
about.
that, and
Mhm.
yeah, you've seen him. I thought
Yeah.
it was fascinating. I was like, there are people who, perceive or say that they have these certain abilities, whether they're spiritual, whether some maybe call them psychic, some maybe call them, benevolent. Some people, whatever it may be, some people will diagnose us variantly different. But one thing I always thought that was interesting is, how come people who have these quote unquote gifts, how come they can't use them for themselves?
Oh, yeah. I would like to know that answer as well. So how I have been guided on that, and I also do want to touch on Tyler Henry as well, because I love that you brought him up. But not knowing things about ourselves is important, because if we know too much, then it can take our own free will out of the way. And we are supposed to still live a life. Just because we're psychic, or we're psychic mediums, and that varies by person. Not everybody can communicate with spirit, and some people are better mediums than they are psychics. Some people are better psychics than they are mediums. Some people are great at both. It really just depends. But when it comes to ourselves, and I remember, if you're familiar with John Edward, I remember him talking about this, that when he had, come into his gifts and, just had grown into a very good medium, right? And truly believed that if anything was going to happen, he was going to know. And then he ended up being blindsided by his mother's passing, and I believe also his aunt's passing. And he was so angry about that. Like, how could I not have known? Right? I know when everybody else, and I know how to do it with these people, but I couldn't do it for myself. So it can be a little frustrating. But again, like I said, the way I've been guided in that is, just the message I've received for myself is just, we're not supposed to know, because it gets in the way of free will. And that makes sense, because think about it. Let's just say someone is supposed to pass away, and and then you get in the way of that when you're not supposed to. So we're not supposed to change things in that element. So that's part of it as well. But getting back to Tyler Henry, I love how he works. He has the gift of psychometry, which is when you hold an object. So you usually, when you see him, he's holding the object of the loved one they're trying to connect with. So that's how he's connecting to the energy. And I've seen him a couple times on TV as well, and just watching him do that. and he just has such a pure nature to him, and just a, clearly a good soul, and he's doing, this to help others. And I love that, he's out there doing that, and you see that he's free of ego in this as well. I mean, I don't know him personally, but at least from what I've seen. So yeah, he's just he's a cool guy. I hope to meet him someday.
Yeah, I think he's from originally this Northern California region.
I think so. I think he's in LA, or at least the LA area.
Somewhere around that area.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure, but I know he works with a lot of celebrities now. So I know he's predominantly around LA now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think his stuff, I mean, the things that he says sound so accurate, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And
he's very good.
Yeah. And so when you're accurate, I think that kind of sends a signal to other people, like, how does this person know this? Like, it doesn't make sense, to the average person. So it's just like, okay, something's going on. So what is it? And so, I don't know. I think there's always this discrepancy. And I think like religious, religious things typically say, you shouldn't mess with those things. You shouldn't do those things. Those things are from the dark energy in general, plural, no matter what, if you have these abilities. But then, I think like one thing I always wonder is like, when you see people, that were in, let's say the Bible, for example, these were people, prophets, they heard things, they saw things, and it's just like, there's some type of like random contradiction there. It's like, well, how did these people see and hear things, but we're not saying that they're bad? And then it's like, at one point, because we said they're prophets, but
yeah. If
you're outside of that time, this person probably isn't a prophet, and they're probably doing something, with bad energy, or that's malevolent in general, right? But I always wondered, like, well, that doesn't make sense. I mean, you had Noah, and then you had Moses, right? He had the burning bush and stuff like that. So there's like Ezekiel. He went into the desert, I guess it may be, if I'm paraphrasing that correctly, and he saw this ship or this thing come out with like spinning wheels, and it's like, sounds like an extraterrestrial type of like episode, if I ever heard one. But I always think that's interesting. I'm like, well, wait a minute, people are seeing things, but they're not considered bad, and that they shouldn't do these, and these people are seeing futures. So who defines which one is from God and which one isn't? That's always interesting.
Yeah, I think that's a good question too, because a lot of people do hold a lot of judgment, and I do find it surprising that the more religious people tend to be more judgmental. How ironic, right? And there's this one woman, she has passed, I think, within the last couple of years. Her name was Janet Novak. She was at one time a nun and became a very famous medium because she was able to communicate with spirit. She ended up teaching, and her school still exists in New Jersey and does very well. And so when people, were very critical, and, making comments and usually referencing the Bible, here she was able to also reference the Bible with support and love, and I understand how you're feeling, but this is what I have been taught. So I always found her so fascinating, especially because I do come from a Catholic upbringing, and that is one of the things we're created, like in that environment, we're taught to fear it, to look at it as evil or as witchcraft, or and I think oftentimes people fear what they don't understand. So it's easier to pass judgment and to kind of compartmentalize who that person is and make them seem evil, crazy, whatever the case may be, because it will then make that individual feel safe. So it really does tend to stem from fear, and it's going beyond that and those basic emotions. But I think ultimately we are not meant to judge. And when we do, I think that can put us in a very negative situation, even if we think we are doing right by our judgment. It's not for us as humans. And that's just, again, that's my own belief. But I do find it fascinating. It reminds me, I went to a school that was very Christian, and where I grew up, I was taught that being Catholic, you're also Christian. But I was put in my place like, no, you are Catholic. That is not Christian. And I was so taken aback by that, like, oh, okay, well, that's not what I was taught. And I was essentially told that I didn't count, that because of how the religion I was raised in. And again, that just shocked me, because I was like, you're Christian. Why are you judging? What is this for you to judge? So it is very interesting. I don't see as much of that anymore. I'm sure it'll come up if it's meant to, and if there's some sort of lesson I'm meant to meet or understand in that, it'll present itself. But yeah, it is a fascinating one when religion comes up, and the judgment and the criticism.
Yeah, I think that's where I kind of like, I think that's always my pushback on certain things is just like, does this, respect religious things or does this not, and I always want to be
Mhm.
cognizant of everyone's
Yeah.
feelings. And also, I want to be self-critical. I want to be self-critical, self-aware. I want to make sure that I'm, I mean, you can't be fair to everyone and everything, but I want to try to make
Correct.
sure that I keep a baseline of, keeping everybody's thought or compassion or their feelings and emotions in mind. And even myself, I don't want to sit there and say that, hey, look, this is what it is. This is where I stick to the line of there's something. I don't know what it is, but I've seen some things and I've experienced some things. I don't know exactly what they are. Because for me, that is a safe place of where I'm also critiquing myself. I'm not taking myself totally serious, but I'm also taking myself serious enough to see certain things and see patterns and signals, and also say, hey, I don't know what it is, but I've seen these things. And I'm not sure what that means, but there are some things that I've seen, and just leave it at that.
Yeah. And I think it's just about being respectful, like you're just describing basic respect and having respect for others, just, respect, compassion, love, all these things to have towards other human beings that just is going to raise vibration. We don't have to agree. That's fine, but to have that respect and, agree to disagree, great. Well, let's be harmonious, I don't think it's easy to ever convince somebody of their beliefs, and I don't think that's for us to do. But when you get to that level of respect where you could just say, I respect your feelings and I respect your beliefs, beautiful. It's a great way to live. It's peaceful.
I agree. I think it's a peaceful way. And also, like I said, to, add back onto that is that I think you have to always, one thing about being, having humility is always not taking yourself too seriously and not,
I agree.
taking everything that you might have experienced as a truth or 100% a
Yes.
conviction of facts.
Yeah.
And when you keep yourself in that position, you're always staying open-minded, which
Mhm.
is why I don't
Open
put
to
titles
learning.
on myself. I don't call myself this or that, or I had this or et cetera. I can just tell you that I've seen some things and I've experienced some things. I'm not sure what that means, but I've seen some things, and I've seen this numerous of times. And this is what I think that I experienced. This is what I think that I saw or heard. And ironically, this is the output. So you can take it, you can take that whatever way you want to articulate that. But people saw this, people saw that, people heard me say this, and then this happened numerous of times. So with that being said, you can make your own form opinion, because I'm also trying to make my own form opinion of that as well. Because at some point I'm being self-critical where I'm like, wait, what was that real? Or, did that really happen? But then I'm seeing something in the physical plane that other people have seen. And that can say, well, what the hell? You said this or you saw this and this happened. And it's just like, is that a coincidence? Because I always want to be cognizant of myself. I don't want to, feel myself, I don't have this narcissism where I just like believe everything that I say is like this thing and I'm this person or something else like that. I just believe like, maybe I could be wrong. There's something there. Maybe I don't understand fully. Maybe it is a coincidence. But when I see something over and over again, I might want to pay attention to it. So that's kind of how I take things for it. So I don't like to say that, everything that I'm saying is 100% truth or it's a fact or that this is really happening or that I'm this or I'm some guide or I have this ability or something else like that. I have no idea about any of this stuff. I just know that there's something there. And I think that I've seen some patterns and I can kind of see them when they come. And I don't quite frankly understand them 100%, but I just know something because I've seen it happen so many times. and you begin to trust those things, right? You
Yeah.
begin to trust
Yeah.
those
Because,
things, but you also should question them. I think when you don't question them, that makes you almost like this narcissistic type of individual or being, right? Because you don't question
yeah.
anything that may be happening. And then also, I think at some point you could also, and maybe not for everyone, but I feel like it can also make you kind of like this person could be delusional and,
Hmm.
also question your own psyche, your mental ability. I think people who don't question their own mental ability or capabilities, that may be some type of problem, right? Because now you just
Yeah.
think that, no, this is really it, or I'm this person, you're declaring these things, and you don't exactly know exactly how that works. Because like we spoke about earlier, we don't exactly know everything, right? And maybe we can't
Yeah.
handle the capacity of things. So to declare that this is this or this person is that is a little bit tricky because we might not exactly understand what that means.
It's true. There could be a more to it, and there likely is. I mean, I do believe in having an element of understanding our own individual truth, and I believe we're meant to connect with that. It's just, kind of like what you're saying. It's just once you start getting to a place where your truth has to then extend to others, like it has to. That's when it's a problem because that's narcissistic. My truth is not going to be your truth or the next person's truth. We're meant to find our own truth, and that might complement others. It might not. It might completely clash. It doesn't make one right or wrong, but again, that's very earth duality, and we are about black and white, right or wrong. But spirituality and energy, there's a lot of gray in that. And there's a lot of things we're not going to fully understand, but, own the truth, own your own truth, that is, and respect others. That there's going to be a variance, and that's okay. It doesn't make you wrong per se. It just might make you wrong in someone else's eyes. But I do believe we're meant to walk our path and figure that out.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, I understand that. And it makes total perfect sense. I think I was Catholic for a while too as well. Like I said, Cape Cod, St. Luke's camp. Yep. Definitely went through that. Yeah. Definitely was Catholic. One thing I remember about Catholic is when I was in this Catholic school, I remember, and it's a weird thing that you brought this up. I probably mentioned this in one of the podcasts too, as well as that, when I was in Catholic school, it was really shocking because I lived literally across the street from my Catholic school at the time.
Mhm.
And I didn't like the school. I just didn't like it. We were praying all the time. I think we called it Nas at the time. We would do that.
Yes, yeah.
It would cut our recess in half, and then we would, we're on our knees and we're like praying, and like, I don't know, a little bit. There was the irony of it is that we're taught things like, you shouldn't do, you shouldn't worship idols, and then there's these statues that aren't these beings, and we're
Mhm.
looking at them as representations. So then it's kind of
Yeah.
conflicting to me because I'm like, I'm always a person who asks questions, and it might make people uncomfortable sometimes because I'm asking these questions that make sense, that resonates. So it causes, so when we talk about people and we talk about cognitive dissonance, I typically bring that energy because it's just like I question things and people have to stop for a second. Like, what is he saying? Like, that makes me feel uncomfortable because I feel what he's saying, but why is he saying that? And I don't understand that answer. Ugh, go away. And for me, it's just like there's this thing where I need to ask. It's like, why are we kneeling on our knees and we're cutting my recess in my fun time, and all I'm doing is praying, and there's this big
Mhm.
statue up here, and it's not even that being. That being should be everywhere. It should be an essence of energy. And we're looking at this statue that's over me. And then if I push that statue, or if I knock that statue over, obviously I couldn't, but I'm just, just saying, for example, people would freak out. I can't believe you. This is not the real being at all. This is just a statue of what we think may be a representation of that, which obviously we know that's probably not what that person looked like at all, living in the Middle East, right?
Yeah.
But, we have, that probably was some English lady, 1,000 years ago, or whatever, right? And they just
Yep.
say, just,
Yep.
it's my wife. Yeah. Painted like her. Yeah. Chris
Yep.
is awesome. Yeah. Looks just like Chris. But but it's things like that. It's like, people tend to, taint things. But when I look at things like in religion, when I start looking at things like, Moses, for example, when he went up to the mountain of Mount Sinai, if I'm thinking
Mm-hmm.
paraphrasing that correctly, and he came back down, and people, they had melted up a lot of the jewelry, and they were praising this deity or this statue or this symbol, and this was idolism. And so one thing I never get is like, how do, when we start talking about religions, like especially Christianity and Catholicism, how are people, praising crosses and holding them and, and looking at these Marys and kneeling down to these objects? These aren't the real entities or beings. The beings are bigger than that. Even when we start talking about church, if you read those scriptures, it's supposedly, if I'm paraphrasing this correctly, somebody, tell me if I'm wrong, but, the body is a temple, right? The body is a church, right? So, what is the physical reasoning for actually having to go exactly into a church and that making you someone holy? Those things are just seem very contradictory based off of what we're reading. From what I understand, they don't make sense. And like I said, I would do this as well too. I would bring over, there would be these Mormons and different religious people that would come to my door as a kid, and I would invite them in, and everybody would get annoyed. Like, why are you bringing them in here? And my thing was, I would let them in. I would talk to them. They'd be like, and they would get excited. It was like, hey, he's letting us in. Like, wow.
Yeah.
Because
that's normal.
They was like, why is this guy letting us in?
You used to get turned away.
Yeah. So I'd let them in. They'd ride miles for bikes. I'd give them some water or whatever it may be. And I would talk to them and then I would ask them questions. And then they would like get lost with the questions. And they would say, hey, you know what?
Yeah.
I'll be back next weekend. Those are great questions. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't know if this is how it's supposed to go, but they always say like, well, nobody ever asked us that question before. That's a great question. Let's go back. We're going to ask our other elder and this person, etc. And I remember I asked him this question. I talked about it on my previous podcast. But I asked him, I said, when you look at things like, for example, this is one example. When you start talking about, Adam and Eve, and then Cain and Abel. Yeah. When you start looking at Cain and Abel and Adam and Eve, there were 4 people on the earth, right? Right? Cain killed his brother Abel, right? And so now there's 3 people, right? Right? Mm-hmm. Now Cain was banished to the land of Nod. So there's only 2 people. And then Cain's in the land of Nod. And then he came back with a wife and a family. Where did he get the other family from? Right?
Yep. Yep.
Who are the people of the land of Nod? If there was only 4 people there and Abel was killed, there's 3 people now. And then Cain was banished to the land of Nod. So how did he come back with a family when there was only 2 people, Adam and Eve?
Yeah.
Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So
I love that you're bringing this all up, though, because I actually recently heard this. There's this gentleman, I don't recall his name, but he channels a being. I don't know exactly who this being is, but his channelings are quite fascinating. And one of the things that came up recently was about Jesus Christ, and that Jesus is, again, according to these channelings, did not want to be worshipped, did not want followers. He wanted to create leaders. He wanted to create free thinking for us to understand we are all of Christ and we are all have these abilities. And, and I sat with that, because, as you were describing just about having a Catholic upbringing and, all the things we're taught, and just like that moment, I'm like, you know what? That resonates very strongly of, we all have this within us, the Holy Spirit within is what allows us to communicate, right? And to expand our consciousness. And, so I do feel that, kind of releasing the confines of religion, it doesn't mean we're releasing the teachings, but again, just releasing those confines and the structure of it has to be this way and it has to be that way or else. That is very human. That is not of love, which Jesus is. So I just find it all incredibly fascinating. But I love, just, what you're talking about with the Mormons, just, being open and asking questions and, creating thinking and an expansion in that of just, have you considered this and what about that? And because we get so confined of how to think and it makes us think less. I mean, look at our education system. We are put in a box to think one way, and, it creates very good workers. But when we start to think beyond that, that does not make good workers. Free thinkers can be very dangerous in this world. So, religion serves as a structure to keep us in this line. Education keeps us structured to keep us in this line. So when we start to expand outside of that is where we open up to so much, to possibility, to learning, to growing, to evolving. And I love that this has just been a really big time for that now. And I think it's going to continue. And, it's pretty incredible.
I agree with you. I do think it's pretty incredible. I do think as well that we're in this, space where people, I think like the great reset of COVID caused a lot of people to stop.
Yeah.
A lot of things I was saying previously, people couldn't connect with.
Yeah.
100%. Your average person, your average individual, your average blow Joe, whatever you want to call it, they couldn't connect with it. It was too much. And so after the pandemic, I noticed a lot of people, bringing up certain things that I spoke about or things that I would talk about and connecting with those more and being more open to those things. Where prior I felt like people were just like, they were stuck into this whole, process, this system that they wanted to follow, again and again and again. And, this whole, baseline of a system that you have to wake up, you go do this, you go this, and like even the whole 9 to 5, people wouldn't question it. And, for me, I would always question, every single thing, 9 to 5, anything you threw at me, I always question, I would say, how do people, for example, they want to have kids and then, they work a 9 to 5, like when do they see the kid? Because the kid comes, they don't see the kid till after the school or till after they've gotten off of their work. So now they're tired. How much time goes into actually raising that children and spending quality time with that child? And I hear people saying, deadbeat fathers, and then, the mother was around, the mother's working all day. How was she around? They were dropped off with the babysitters. So the babysitter raised the kid, or the daycare. It's like, there's this process, right? And then eventually, when they become teenagers, who else raises the kids? Their friends, right? So, or people that they're watching on TV and et cetera. Those are things that raise the child. I think there's this like thought that because you are there in some type of like, I guess you want to say, housing structure, then you're there. If you live in that same housing structure, that person is there and they're raising that person. But when you really start looking at the time, there's no way that person can raise that child. If you're working 9 to 5, how does it make sense? This is not like the times where, for example, women didn't work, or even when a man took the child and they would go hunting with them and, bring back food and et cetera. There was quality time there. So you as a parent got to, push a lot of, I would say good things mostly, into the kids, right? I'm trying to think positive wise, you were able to push a lot of positive attributes into the child and instill certain qualities that may have not been able to happen in today's time for the most part, unless you're doing homeschooling and both parents are working at home, or the father's taking the son or the daughter, whatever, to work, right, with them. There's real quality time there. But like these days, typically, if you don't have financial freedom, you're probably not spending quality time with your kids. So the whole idea of like, I'll raise my child is laughable to me, because it's like, you're not really raising your child. The system is raising your child.
Yeah.
And if you go against the system will take your child.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You don't even own anything. You don't own nothing. You don't own your house. You don't pay your taxes to take the house.
Yeah.
You don't apply by the system. So when people say, "Oh, it's the mark of the beast," I'm like, well, what is the mark of the beast? Let's say we'll play that game. Has that mark of the beast already not happened? You already have a social security number.
Social security, exactly, right out of the womb.
It's a number. Try to go off the grid with that and see how well you live.
Yeah,
it won't.
Exactly. Yeah, I know people are trying to shift that way, and like you said, COVID is awakening people to that. More people are trying to go off grid. There's a lot of like off grid communities. It's interesting. It's an interesting time.
It's very interesting, but I just think like what we defined and think of things, we start immediately just like people, there's just some people who just like, I don't know, I think they just like read religious books and they don't really think about what it's saying. Right? It's like, it's going to be a number, and it's going to be the mark of the beast. It's going to be put on your forehead or somewhere, blah, 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 and etc. And it's a number, and you can't buy anything without it. I'm like, dude, that is your social security number. You can't buy anything without a social.
Yeah.
You can't get a house without a social security number. What do you mean? So if we're talking about a mark of a beast, we've already had it. If we're talking about some type of registering thing, that you can't do anything without it. Like, if that's the case, then that already exists. It's like, no, it's a credit card. It's Neuralink. It's something they put in your head. I'm like, well, if you listen to what it says you can't buy anything. You can't live within the world and do anything without it. That's a social security number. If you want to say something is doing that, we're already doing that already. People know, but it's the chip. I didn't say a chip.
Yeah, I mean, I get actually both sides of this debate, because it is a debate, right? It's these types of conversations go beyond a discussion. It becomes debatable, right? Where some people believe one thing, some people believe another. I actually agree with both sides on this, because yes, I agree that we are pretty much given, we are branded with social security numbers pretty much right out of the womb, right? And we're in a structure, we are in a confine. You have to do this or else, right? But I know as things are changing and things are evolving technologically, there are shifts that are occurring that are taking away free will more and more. And I think that is where this fear, and I'm just going to put it as a fear because, that's concerning, right? We should not lose our free will. We should not have an or else. I think it's recognizing, like, if they're talking about, having implantations in our brains that are not ours, or under our skin that is not ours, that is, it's not even biological. It's taking away our free will and working with threats. And that in itself is considered evil. Right? That is not godly. That is definitely a darker force, a darker nature. But if you think about it, Earth has been known for quite some time as the devil's playground. We know Lucifer fell to Earth. Did he ever leave? Right? So, there's a lot to really consider. I think, though, when it comes to us as individuals, it is very easy for us to be controlled by fear. It is how things have worked for a very long time. COVID was a great example of that. It was very fear-based, and a lot of people were controlled via fear. And if you look back in history, fear is an excellent motivator. Fear is a great controller. So it's really, as an individual, connecting to who you are, recognizing you're safe, you're connected, you're loved. And does this mean that we don't have things to be afraid of? Not necessarily. I think that's oversimplifying it, but the more higher your vibration can be, because fear, if you are scared, your vibration automatically lowers. But when you have faith, and you're automatically at a higher vibration. I have faith that I will be cared for. I have faith that what is meant to happen will, and I have faith that things are going to work out, whatever the case may be. Again, this is very much oversimplifying, but it's really a matter of where you choose to put your vibration in that. So if we choose to stay in fear, we're going to be controlled no matter what. But when we stay out of fear and we make our decisions based on our faith, our feelings, so when we get those kinds of stipulations of do this or else, and we're like, or else what? Do your worst, because I am sticking to my convictions, to my heart space, because that's really what it comes down to, is someone doesn't feel right about something because it's not speaking to them inside, and they're saying no. But again, it really just depends on a lot of things, really. Their upbringing, their subconscious programming, Subconscious programming is very powerful when it comes to control and controlling with fear. So a lot of people are waking up to that. A lot of people are snapping out of that. So a lot is changing and a lot is evolving. But my reminder to people is stay out of fear. Don't let fear control you. So when it comes to the mark of the beast, if it is meant to come in our lifetime in a different way than what is already existing, don't fear what's coming. Just trust that you will find a way that works for you.
Yeah, that's deep. And I agree with you on that, a lot of that, 100% for sure. But I think I think more what I'm talking about on that perspective is when we look at the blunt definition of something,
Yeah.
because I'm very analytical on things like that. It's like, if I say brown is this, and if I say purple is this, it has to have these clear definitions. And so there was, from what I remember, if I, paraphrasing this correctly, a clear definition that you won't be able to buy or do things without this number, right?
Yeah.
And if you don't have it, you can't survive. So to me, that already exists. That is a social
I
security
agree with
number.
you.
And everybody is branded uniquely. And and if we want to say the beast, who is the beast? The beast can be the government, whatever we want to call it, right? But something has given us all these assigned numbers to every individual in the civilized world, quote unquote. So if we want to say that there is some type of system that does that, there's already a system that already does that to everyone who's within the system, right? So I think that's where my discrepancy really is with that. I do think there's more extremes as well. For example, like we mentioned, chips and et cetera, but you don't really need those to be tracked anymore because you have the social and you have your mobile device. And the problem is, I think like a lot of humans don't really understand a lot of the things around them and how they actually work. And I think when you don't understand that, you really can't define who is what and what is the mark of the beast and what is not, because you might not even know if the mark of the beast is in front of you, because you might not even know what that is. For example, your cell phone automatically tracks your location. It knows everything else about you. It can push that all into AI, right? And AI can predict things about you that you might not even think that it can predict about you, but it can with almost psychic abilities. So it's like at a certain point, this is where I look at it and say, well, wait a minute. Hold on. We can do a lot of these things now. People are saying, oh, I don't want to be tracked. I can track you with your phone, but you don't know that because you don't know what's in the tech. We've made it to where it's gamification. It's gamified or we've pushed it as a part of your life, as a form of something friendly, or as a form of something that's helpful for you.
Yeah.
And you need it. It's called a phone, and you need that phone. You need to be able to be in contact with people. You need to take it, make sure your daughter has it because it keeps her safe, right? You need to keep that. Make sure Johnny has that phone on him. But really, what is it doing? What is the phone doing to them in general? It allows multiple doors or different ways for people to do certain things, kids to be manipulated by the social media. And then it also allows these companies or people to track them, and some of them are for some of them are for good reasons, but some of them are not. And so when we start talking about tracking and, we want our privacy and we want our freedoms, well, that depends on, do we want actual freedom or do we want the one that's blind, right? As long as we don't know, it's okay. And so from what I've seen, a lot of people tend to take, as long as we don't know, it's fine, right? It's like when it's blunt in your face, it's a problem, right? Like China, for example, not bashing China, but like for China, for example, when they have these cameras and et cetera all over where everybody's knownfully tracked, it's a problem. But when we have, all these cameras everywhere, we've got, Alexa, we've got our iPads, we have our laptops, we have, what's the thing that Ring for your door, right? We have, our Teslas, we have all these Lucid, we have all these different types of cars or machines or things in the world that have cameras on them that can be activated as long as they're attached to the internet. So it's like we're being watched 24/7 if we want to be. So the person who understands the technology is the person who really understands what can happen and the big, how would you say, the big impact of how we can be supervised, if you will, right? Because they understand something holistically that the average person does not even understand. So I think my thing is, in general, is what I'm trying to say is that there are things that a lot of people don't even understand that are doing these things right now. And so the government, or maybe the general, whatever you want to call it, whatever the system, whatever you want to call it, knows, hey, we're doing this already. So what's the big difference of doing this? We'll slowly ease in these things. We're already doing it. We'll just put it more in their faces. We'll have a camera right here and says we're recording, blah, 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 and et cetera. But legally, if we really look at it, they're already doing this when you go behind the system. When you build the systems, you understand how it can watch or do things. You understand its capabilities. And once you understand those capabilities, it's hard for the mind to shrink back.
Yeah, I think these are all really good points. And also, just to think of that even just a little further, is that all of the things you mentioned, we can choose still not to use these things. It's getting harder and harder, yes, just from a convenience standpoint, a connection standpoint, even just a work standpoint, right? It's harder and harder to just leave your phone behind. But the point of it is still a choice. You can shut off your phone. You can leave it home. There's still choice. It's just the more that the free will is taken out of it. And I think that's kind of part of the challenge too, when it comes to technology, is when let's just look at phones, did we know that they were tracking us? There's been an encroachment of these things over time where we've kind of been giving freedoms away without knowing. And the more we've been aware, the more we've kind of been like, oh my gosh, we've kind of gotten now this far to going back is very difficult. And then when you see people like say Edward Snowden that comes out and shares a story, and then he can't even get back into his own country, he's essentially punished for it. It kind of makes us question a lot. And again, that's where the fear really comes in of well, where does that leave me as an individual? What can I do to protect myself so I'm not tracked in a way I'm not comfortable with? Because I mean, right now we're being recorded. People can track us. People know where we're at, can find us. This will live on the internet forever. These kinds of things. We know. Are we all comfortable with this? Probably not. It will also, there's a variance, some people are going to be completely fine. And in a lot of ways, ignorance truly is bliss, right? Like you said, the guys that are involved in tech and they've been knowing for a long time what's going on. And, some of them are doing a big I told you so, and others are kind of like, well, how could you not know this? Every time you accept these updates, who reads their updates, really? I mean, not most people. Not most people. And then let's just say you do read your updates and you're like, I'm not okay with that. You can't omit it. You have to accept it, or you stay in, you have a slower phone, or whatever the case may be. So it's just incredibly interesting. And I think it really just is always going to come down to free will and recognizing there is a choice. We just might not like the choices. So for example, don't have a phone. How many people are going to love that choice? It's still a choice, but most people are not going to like that. And I think those are the things that we kind of are being forced to look at. And I find myself curious and intrigued of how things will evolve, especially in my lifetime, in this regard, because technology is just getting faster and faster, and growing and developing more and more. And it has accelerated so many things, but it is also why so many people are awakening. That's not the only acceleration that's going on. That's a lot of why the spiritual awakening has been really put on fast forward as well.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of those things you said. Very strong, definitely points. But I always like to add something with a little bit of a paprika.
Yeah,
And
I like
with
paprika.
that being said, it's great, right? I think, overall, like I was kind of saying on this point, a lot of people, they do have the choice. And, you touched on that, and I agree with you. They do have the choice, but then there's also that thing of they don't have the choice, because what ends up happening, there's pros and cons into everything. 100%. And unless every human being understands the pros and cons, which they do not understand in technology, I'm not going to bash technology. I'm a man of science. I'm a man of technology. spirituality, all those things. I encompass all those realms. But there's pros and cons to everything. And if you don't understand the nuances and how the system works and how the information is harnessed, right? If you don't understand that, I think that's where you're really not really making decisions based off of like being clear. And I think, when you start looking at these government officials who bringing, tech companies in there, they ask a lot of questions, but they really don't even ask or understand what they're even asking.
Right.
Because they don't understand what information and what it's like to build an app and what access of information, how that looks, and then how you can scale that and how you can pull certain things out and use that for certain references or look at locations and how that can be used to be, I guess you want to say, is not a good way, if you will. They don't understand that. So when you start thinking of that, I would say things get a little bit more complex. And I think a lot of people don't have the time to do that. And it's just easier just to trust the system. And again, I'm not a person who's who's like, oh, you should be afraid of everything. I'm not a fear monger. But what I'm saying is you should understand the pros and cons. And my thing is people do not understand the pros and cons strongly when it comes to technology. And you have a lot of people of this day says, no, I understand exactly what's going on. Did you know blah, 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 blah. Have you built an app? Do you know what databases do? Do you know what you can do with that information? Once you understand the stack and you understand what you can do with that, then you can think of all the pros and cons. Mm-hmm. Whether that be good, whether that be extremely bad, you can see those. It's like your mind is open. You're like, oh, if I really wanted to do this, I could do that. Holy shit. If I really wanted to do this, I could do that and I could save the world. But I also could fucking do this. Mm-hmm. And then you come to a mind, you're like, holy shit. And that changes and scales as your company grows because you learn more interesting things. And I'm gonna open something that I probably have not said publicly before, right? And I'm gonna say this. One thing I question right now, being in this space as well, is, as somebody in tech and as somebody in spirituality and a man or a human or a being of this realm of now, I question AI references. And what I mean by that, at what point does AI's output become spiritual?
Good point.
And what I mean by that is a lot of the AI systems and these supercomputers and stuff like that, the more we get supercomputers, the more we're pushing out this amazing information. But what are we opening? What are we unlocking? Who's feeding that information? We're saying it's based off of historical data, but some of the outputs have amazed, I don't want to say some of it, a lot of the outputs have amazed a lot of AI engineers of where is it calculating or getting this data. And I have something that's going to be a little bit contradictory. And I will say this. I feel that there's something weird going on. There's something weird going on. And I might be wrong horribly, but I might be right. I have a feeling. And I have a feeling that the same things we talked about previously, when we talked about the intentions, of touching a Ouija board and asking it a question. Does these AI systems get these references at a certain point from spiritual beings? Is it referencing spirituality? Does it know these answers? Does it pick up these things because it's touching something else at a certain point? Are we opening up some type of Pandora box to a spiritual realm, but we're thinking it's digital? Where does the line between spirituality and digital connect? I believe they run on the same plane. We just build tools that the universe or God already created, if you will.
Yeah, working with frequency.
Playground.
Yeah.
So we use these tools and we manipulate things. We want to fly. So what do? We copy what a bird does and we design it and say, oh, now we can fly. Right? We want to see Mars. Okay, what do? We break some stones and whatever. We make something called glass. And then we make these glasses to be able to see further. So now we can see in the moon. We're manipulating things that already exist. We're not creating anything new. We're manipulating things. That's the great things about humans. We can manipulate things that are within our elements and make them do things that almost appear magical, right?
Yeah.
Right? They're magical at a sense. But my point is, at what point do we get to where the spiritual world and machines are connecting? Who's giving those answers? And that might sound wild to some people. Like, wait a minute, dude, what are you talking about? Come on, bro. It's got to be just the machines. And so when they talk about the machines saying, these machines are becoming sentient. Well, are those the machines?
Yeah.
Or are the machines just a big digital Ouija board?
Could be. It's frequency, right? And when you match frequencies and can start to blend and, have that intertwining, who's to say where one ends, the other begins, or how it intertwines, if it intertwines. And, it's certainly thought provoking.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at things like this, like there's like a facility in Europe. I forget if it's in Switzerland or whatever. It's just a facility. And basically what they're doing in this facility, they have like, underneath the ground, and they have like these, I think it's like these atoms or these particles. And these particles, what they're trying to make them do is create suns. They're also trying to make them create portals and things like that. But we're doing that with machines. We're manipulating. We're coming between the space between biohacking and then using machines to create things that are supernatural, that are natural, but in unnatural ways.
Yeah.
We're manipulating what we see around us, and those things are creating things. So when we start talking about machines, we start talking about technology, all we're doing is manipulating forces. And somewhere there's a line where spirituality connects. So when you create something that can create a portal, you're touching something supernatural. When you create something that can get you to another planet, that's in itself, that planet is some type of essence. It is an energy. It is a being of its own.
Yeah.
Right. Even the earth, we have a core, right? This energy creates this, yeah, it's just interesting to me. So I think like what I'm saying in general is like overall, at what point does AI cross to where it's just like this supernatural spiritual being that is aware of itself? And so when we say this, sentient being, what does that mean? And I feel like we need to be careful because we're at a point to where we might not understand, or if the people who are building this don't understand what they're really doing 100%, they don't know who they're connecting with. They don't know who they're communicating with and who's giving them certain answers. And I feel like when we start getting AI, when AI becomes so powerful that it is a reference, or it is the government, it is the miracle, because at some point it can create miracles. So when we say like, oh, well, this is the Antichrist and this is, I mean, that's if it's a person.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, from the trajectory where we're going, again, not trying to scare people, but from the trajectory where we're going, AI can easily be an Antichrist. It can easily be those things that we've been, afraid of, or the boogeyman, right? These fear tactics that have been put up in the past. And again, I'm not one of those people who just like believe everything that religion pushes at you, because a lot of times it's been manipulated to promote fear and colonialism and things like that. But there's some truths, right? There's a lot of truths in a lot of these things. And I believe obviously some of these things happen. I've been to Mount, Nimrod in the middle of the mountains in Turkey and seen these huge statues in mountains in the middle of nowhere. I've been to, Jesus's mother's house, Mary, in the middle of nowhere, and seen where they were last supposedly at and stuff like that. And I've seen these ancient realms. I've seen Göbekli Tepe. I've been underneath the ground 800 feet, and I've seen these mystical places where I feel like I just always need to connect with that energy. And it's just like, to me, when I think about things, it's just like things are way bigger than what we think, and we need to be very careful, because I think what the ancients realized and what they understood was that there are things on this plane that you can do magical things with, but you don't need machines.
Yeah.
And I think they figured out a way to bypass the way that we're doing it. I believe there's more, like you mentioned paths earlier. You said there's paths you get to go down to. But I also believe that there's paths on how you can do certain things. So somebody who may master certain spiritual things may figure out spiritual ways to get around things, where somebody else may build a machine to do it.
Yeah.
But
and I think too, you're making such a good point too, because a lot of what you're describing is just really the manipulation of energy. And in my experience, whenever manipulation is involved in anything, there's consequences. And some of those are positive consequences and some are not. And it's a matter of, when we work with what we don't know and don't fully understand, which we don't, you're probably going to have some surprises. Not all good ones.
Yeah. And I agree with that 100%. And I think you said the most magical word, and it's just like, when we're messing with these energies or manipulating energies, that we don't understand the full capacity of that. And I think a certain period of time, some of these people or humans or beings, whatever, understood how to do these in different ways. And we're just doing it now with these metal things. And so we always try to look back in the past and we say, oh, well, Göbekli Tepe is roughly 12,000 years ago or 10,000 years ago during the Younger Dryas, et cetera. But, but how do they build these and put these stones and all this stuff like this? And what was this for? Well, they didn't have any high crazy technology because they didn't have metal. They didn't have titanium. Well, maybe there's one way to kill. What's the term? There's more than one way to kill a what's that terminology?
It's like skin a horse, is it? I actually don't.
Kill two birds with one stone, right? There may be more ways to do that, right?
Yeah.
There's not always one way. So maybe they understood another way of doing that we don't understand, and we think that in order to be at this certain space, you have to do it with machines. And our way of thinking of now, we need metal. They need to be able to go to Mars. They need to have this type of thing, or they can't do it. But maybe they knew how to manipulate these things in different ways than what we know how. We use metal to manipulate things. They may have used something totally different that we can't that we don't even fathom. And so when we're trying to look back in the past and look for these, well, how can they build these things? How can they put these stones here? Well, maybe they were using something else, or maybe they had a bunch of slaves. Well, no, there's no proofs or evidence of that. So how do they do it? When you look at the pyramids, each individual stone was created uniquely for that exact position.
Mm-hmm.
Who the heck would do that?
Yeah.
And why?
I think there's a lot of things, though, that history does not tell us because they don't want us to know. I believe a lot has been altered. And, just when you look at our education system, just from a historical standpoint, right? We are told the same things every year repetitively because it's what they want us to know. So yeah, could we go and do some independent research to see, like, is this, valid or not? Sure, to a degree, right? But I personally believe there's a lot more than they're telling us. And we're kept in this box, if you will, of this is the knowledge we're going to give you. And there's a lot more outside of that is not going to be shared. And I believe those that do discover it probably don't get to share that information either. So I do find it fascinating because I know for me, I have a lot of questions on those kinds of things. And as I've just evolved more spiritually, I'm realizing just having the questions show that you're understanding there's more to what we've been told. And, you're bringing up such a good point about all this.
Oh, yeah. I think, one thing I always sit there and say is history is written by its victors, and it's not something that I coined and I created, but it's something I like to regurgitate out to the human beings out there so they can have some type of reference. And one thing that I always realize is everything that I learned and everything I questioned as I became an adult, I learned was completely wrong. And as I traveled to places, I learned that was completely wrong. Yeah. And, so when we start talking about Christopher Columbus, being the first European to discover, the Americas, and then we start talking about, was he Italian, but it turns out, he was in Portugal and he was marrying royalty in Portugal, which is forbidden unless you were Portuguese royalty. When it's talked about, he didn't, there was no reference of his parents. And when on his deathbed, his children asked, where are we from? Where's our family from originally? Can you tell us more about it? He would not tell them on his deathbed. He also named all the places that he colonized after places in Portugal, places like Cuba. These are places in Portugal, right?
Yeah.
These are places that he experienced. And, Columbus, also, he got his funding from Spain. And, Spain gave him the funding. But before every time he came back from a voyage from the quote unquote New World, he stopped by Spain and told the king. And then he stopped by Portugal to tell the king there. Then he went to Spain. Why was he doing that? What did he owe to the Portuguese king? Unless it's like one of his offsprings from one of his side, how do you say it? I want to be politically correct during these days. I don't know. Maybe it's side chick. I don't know what they say back then, but yeah.
Well, I get that. That's good.
That was one of his offsprings from possibly one of his side women or girlfriends or, mistresses, whatever you want to call it at that time.
Yeah.
But these are the things. So it's like, why did he have so much endearment for Portugal versus Italy if he was originally from Italy? And where was his friends growing up in Italy? Like, why didn't they write things about him, et cetera? It's like none of those things really make sense. But he was definitely fluent in Portuguese, obviously, and Spanish, which has some similarity. But Italy does too. I mean, Italian does too. You can pretty much understand them if you understand those three languages roughly.
Yes.
But I don't know. I always think that's interesting. And then when we grew up, we learned that Leif Erikson was supposedly the first European that we know of to actually discover the Americas. So it's like. And then we talk about Native Americans crossing the Bering Strait, but then we find out that there were also Polynesians who were crossing through Easter Island, through Chile, and we found, yams inside of their stomach that came from, those islands. And it's just like, what is really going on? So it's like, we don't really know. And then we look at Olmecs who have these unique African-like structures or phenotypes, and then it's just like, were they Polynesians? Or were they some type of Africans? And then you look at Christopher Columbus's journal where he talks about, how he came to the New World and supposedly there was these people with these golden spears with really dark skin who would trade for them and come in ships or boats or whatever it may be before he came there. And then you also have to understand, in I think it was 1492, when Columbus came to the Americas and quote unquote discovered it. Right before that, the Moors were controlling in 1492. They lost their control over what? Over Spain. So my thing is, I believe if you start reading, when you're intelligent, you start looking at patterns. And then when you understand a certain mindset, you kind of know, you can feel an energy about people. Maybe it's my Tyler Henry kicking in or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, there you go.
But, it's like, I think like what happened is when the Moors were there, and they brought a lot of things to Spain and Southern Europe. And I think what Christopher Columbus found out is during his travels and his interactions with the Moors, that they may have told him of this place where you can get gold and things like that. Mm-hmm. And then he, when he was asked, to find a new way, he was like, hey, I know this place has a lot of gold. I think I want to get there. But he couldn't actually ask them for that funding for that because nobody would do it because it's this mystical place that nobody in Europe knew, that he heard from some Moorish people that exist that had gold. So what can I do? I can get funding saying I'm going to find a new route, just, trade with India. So I'm going to get it within that pretense. But really, I heard this story about this place with gold, and that's really where I'm going to go. And I heard kind of how to get there, and let me see if I can follow it from what they said. And, ironically, those same regions where Columbus actually, where those Moorish people came from, he came back years later and they took a lot of slaves from that same region, which is irony. But that's a whole nother story.
No, like I said, I just think, but even really what you said is just that once you really start looking at stuff, you realize that we're not being taught. Even, I can't even say you're not being taught the whole story. You're not really being taught the story. It is so fragmented, and, it's like with anything. Take enough partial truths to make it believable, and it pushes an understanding for a reason. And it's just really, it's like, well, what's the reason, right? Is it control? Is it manipulation? I'm sure it's a lot more on so many levels, especially if it comes down to, people being more independent, more individual, because that's less of a thing now, right? We're very reliant on a society. We're very reliant on a system. And maybe that wasn't the case before. So I think it's good. It's a good note to all of us to really dig deeper.
Yeah, and I think we should all dig deeper. And, all my travels and, spiritual journeys, I even learned when I went to the Vatican, I was a little bit creeped out at the fact that there were guards with guns in certain doorways.
And that it's its own independent city that doesn't need to pay taxes, right?
Well,
yeah.
What
are they hiding?
Financial thing. I could buy the financial kick, right? Because the financial kick makes sense, right? We can use that in our logical brains of today.
Sure.
That seems like something corrupt we would do. But when I see guns and guards blocking you, saying you can't go this way, that means if you go,
what are they hiding? Yeah.
What are they hiding? They're gonna shoot you and kill you. They weren't little guns.
No. They are sending the very clear message. Yeah. That death.
Guards. Like if you went to church and you saw armed guards, would you go to church?
No. No, I hope not. But no, it is. Yeah. The Vatican in itself, I just find incredible in terms of secrets. There are a lot of secrets, and many of which I don't think we could even fathom. That talk about cognitive dissonance. I think it would blow our minds, and we would probably not accept half of those secrets as possible or real.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that, I think like seeing is believing. And I think I think this is where I put the importance of people traveling and going on spiritual journeys. If they can figure ways to do it, try to do it as much as possible.
Yeah.
Because your mind will be open. And once it's open, it can never go back to its original size. Unless some trauma happens to you, etc. You're never going to go back to that state. And it's just like, it's crazy to think. And if you're really observant and analytical, see, I'd like to give myself that type of trait. But for me, that was the biggest thing that I noticed. I always noticed the weird little things, and I mentioned them later, and it was like, oh, what? Oh, yeah, that's crazy, right? I didn't pay attention to that. I'm like, wait a minute. There's guards. There shouldn't be guards there with guns. It doesn't make sense. That doesn't worry you. Like, it didn't even startle people. People didn't even notice. They're taking pictures.
Yeah.
That's a Sistine Chapel. Yeah. And then in one room, you can't take pictures because the photos might mess up the wall. I get that part. But like guards in certain rooms that you can't come in, and it wasn't even the Pope down there. So it's like, what is in here? It's just like amazing to me to even think of that. And even when I was at, Mary's house, somewhere in the outskirts of Turkey, I remember going there, and I remember I walked inside. It was Mary. She was painted like really dark. And then I went, and in the front door, I remember they said, hey, no cameras, no phones. I was like, all right, that's cool. No cameras or phone. But then when I get inside, I see like there's this dark Mary, and then I take a right, and there's this old painting of Jesus and his disciples, but they all had afros. And so I was really confused. I was like, I looked at the person I was with and who's from that place, and I was like, hey, what the hell is that? I was like, not to be, mean or rude, but I was like, I'm confused right now. Why do they look like that? Like, that is not what I see on Sunday supper. And when I walked outside, what made it even weirder for me is that like all of these other statues of Jesus and Mary were these, pale European, blonde hair and blue eyed statues sitting everywhere. But then when you went inside the place where you couldn't take a picture, they looked totally different. So I was confused. I was like, I'm confused. And then I remember I told people about that. And like, I was like, that's crazy. And then, like what was this year? I think Putin like released, out of his vault, all these, ancient, Jesus and Mary, like, items of photos of looking not what, we've been told they look like. And it was just like, and all the people that I told that to, they were like, holy shit, you told us that. I was like, I told you that. Yeah, that's crazy. But why is he telling you that? Something's going up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because he's known about these things for years. So why would he say that now? I don't trust that because obviously he has some other type of ulterior motive to distract people in
Look
America.
over here while I do something over here.
Right, because he knew about this prior. So I said, don't put too much sand in that. And at the end of the day, I don't think that really matters. But I think it matters when you're using it for political and colonialism methods, right? Then that's what matters. But other than that, it really doesn't matter because everybody's exactly the same human beings. So at some point it's silly. But when you're told to think somebody looks like a certain way, that's what you think. And so it's like, I felt my own personal cognitive dissonance of like, what the heck is going on? I'm like, do you see that? Or am I just seeing something like, what is that? That's not real, right?
What am I looking at?
Yeah. So we should have named it that. What am I looking at? But yeah, I just think like those and numerous of things that I've learned, even working in the tech and working in the behind the scenes and building things, and even working in the entertainment industry, working with celebrities, going to Michael Jackson's funeral, being in rooms that most people have never been. I've just seen some crazy stuff. I've heard some crazy stuff.
You have
a lot of crazy stuff that you were told shouldn't happen and aren't possible, and they don't happen, and that's a lie, or it's a conspiracy. So what I've learned, Chris, to kind of zip it off, a conspiracy is something that most people just don't know.
I agree.
So therefore,
100%.
It's called a conspiracy. But that doesn't
100%.
mean that it's not real.
No, it is also to, write off as crazy because the word conspiracy or conspiracy theorist came up after, JFK's assassination, and people started having other suggestions to what actually happened that seemed more plausible. So they were termed conspiracy theorists and written off. So that's really, though, as we've become more aware and more awake, we recognize that a conspiracy doesn't mean falsehood. Conspiracy often means you got to dig a little deeper because there's something there that you're missing.
Exactly. We're about to wrap this up, but I think I'm going to say one more thing that's probably pretty magical and pretty crazy and wild and out there. I probably have a bunch of them. So what I'm going to say is like, I remember, and I could say this one publicly because it doesn't matter, but I remember I was talking to this one producer, and he was a producer for, let's say, Lady Gaga. Because I can't say exactly, but he says, we're working and we're in LA, and we were just talking about some stuff, and he kind of told me and my buddy Brandon at the time, he's like, the weirdest thing, or basically he the reason why he doesn't like working with this person, right? Let's say it's Lady Gaga. And he said, because I was working doing a studio session with her, and, she had her own room, and there was a guard there, and he said, you can't go in this room. And he was like, no, but I'm creating these beats I need to hear. And he said he got so excited that he created this one beat or this song, whatever, and he went into her room. And he said he just bust open the door and just pushed it open. The guard, guess who wasn't there at the time? I guess he walked somewhere or whatever. He said he wasn't there. He said he just opened the door because he wanted to see what was inside and tell her about the song. And he said, he told us something that was pretty crazy. I would say it was crazy. I think it sounded crazy to me. It still sounds crazy to me. I wasn't there, but this is what he told us. He said, and he was a legitimate producer, made a lot of songs, a lot of hits. And he said, I opened the door, and excuse my French, he said, that bitch was floating. We were just like, what the fudge? And, being in the entertainment industry in LA, I saw some weird and some supernatural stuff.
Yeah, you would have had to.
And so I didn't just necessarily discount what he said, because some of the stuff that I saw, I thought was just like, what the hell was that? And, a lot of the things people are talking about, they think are somewhat conspiracies. I saw some weird stuff and things that I couldn't logically explain to people and question my reality. But definitely, I didn't see that. I never experienced what he said he saw. But this is what this guy said. This is a professional producer who makes money for his life and, et cetera. And there's a couple of people who were celebrities who kind of went a little bit bananas because they had these things that they saw. I remember Corey Feldman from the Goonies was telling me about these weird rituals and these kind of things that were going on. And he kind of hinted around some things. He didn't really want to say it, but he was like, I'm going to release this thing and I'm going to start talking about this. I'm going to do it. And he didn't do it for years later. But he never really opened out who exactly 100%. And,
No, he can't.
This is also why Corey Haim ended up passing away right after that and et cetera. But he knew a bunch of other stuff. And I saw a bunch of stuff, but I never saw this one specific scenario about this so-called person. Let's say, for example, Lady Gaga. This type of thing happened, but that just, it creeped me out and it just seems supernaturally crazy. But at the same time, I was like, you know what, dude, that sounds crazy. I don't know if that's real, but like, why would he say that if it never happened? Or was he smoking something? Was he on something? But it was like, it sounded too real. And just like how his face was and who he was, and like, why would he even tell us this? But he was just like spooked out for it. He said he never want to work with her again. He said it scared the shit out of him.
Yeah, I believe he saw what he saw.
He's like, that bitch was floating. He said she was just like up in the fucking air. And it was like, what? We were just like, what is going on here? This is a weird conversation. Where's this happening from? But this is literally what he said. And so you never know. And I'm not saying that happened. And I'm not saying it was Lady Gaga. I'm not saying who it was. But I'm just giving an example. And that's crazy. And by the way, I actually spoke to one of Lady Gaga's producers. I never released that podcast. Maybe I will in the future. It's sitting in my vault. Yeah, certain things she couldn't say.
Yeah. There's a lot they can't say.
Yeah, but maybe I'll release it. I want to release it, but I want to edit some things out of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, because she told me I can't just push this out without her reviewing it first, and I'm not going to get canceled from the industry.
It's for her safety too.
I don't think. Yeah, for sure, that too. Yeah. But anyways, with that being said, it's been a great conversation with you. I know we went a little bit over time, but I think it was well worth it. I
appreciate it. Thank you.
I think you said some things earlier on. You said, hey, sometimes those are the better conversations, et cetera. I agree. I think we had a lot of fun conversations. We explored some stuff. It was amazing. And are there any things that you might want to, leave and say, towards the end about anything you want to talk about or mention or highlight? Website, healing?
I mean, basically, if anyone wants to find me, my website is Wasko, wasko.com. And it says a little bit about me, my story, and what I do. And I'm also on Instagram and Facebook at Chris Wasko Medium. So you can find me there as well and, follow my work and give likes if you want. And if not, that's fine too. We're all on our journey, but I appreciate the time. I appreciate talking with you, and just this conversation was great. So thank you very much.
Awesome. And one last thing I'd like to ask you.
Yeah.
When you say medium, can you define to the audience what a medium is and the variances of the others categories, if you will?
Yes, of course. So a medium is someone that can communicate beyond this plane. So with spirit, loved ones, guides, angels, that you serve as a medium between two worlds. Psychic is reading energy of the living, and psychic can vary too. Psychic can be about predictions. Psychic can be about just sensing energy and giving a read on a person. Most of my work is, I like working with the living more. So, like I said, most of my work is spiritual counseling. So I will work with someone to identify where their traumas are in their body, where it's standing out, and will help work through those and help to heal these aspects that are, either creating blocks or holding them back, keeping them from living the life they want to live. And so some people will say that anyone can be psychic, but not everybody can be a medium. So That is something that I have learned from many teachers doing this. So some people will say that they are just psychic or intuitive. Some people will say they are psychic mediums, and some people will just say that they're mediums. I actually had somebody recently told me that it's not psychic mediums, it's just mediums. And she was very stern with me about it. And I was just like, okay, so I think definitions will vary. I feel for me, I just like working with old souls. I like helping kids that have, or people that had childhood trauma, kids that are dealing with traumas. So that's really my work. As far as working with people that have passed, yes, I can communicate with them. But I find that, because I am generally a skeptical person, I think I like to work with the living more, Yes, there's been wonderful reads of people in spirit, and there's no way I could have possibly have known things that I've told people, and I think that's amazing. But I believe we all need to have a healthy dose of skepticism, and I'm just going to keep following my path. So for now, I'm working with the living more than the dead.
Wow, that's awesome. Working with the living and not with the dead. Awesome. I love that. It sounds like a book. You need to look at that. That's like that title is just like ringing to me right now. Awesome. But
Well, thanks.
yeah, Chris, it was great. Thanks for reaching out. It's been an awesome conversation. Maybe we'll invite you back again. I would love to another time for sure.
Yeah, I'd love it.
It'd be great to get Tyler Henry on here one time too. It'd be awesome.
Oh, yeah, that would be great.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be awesome. Yeah. But thank you so much.
Yeah,
Wait
thank
a couple
you.
seconds. We gotta make sure everything uploads.
Of course.
Ladies and gentlemen,
The Kids in the Room Podcast! Podcast!
That's right.
Brought to you by Move Faces TV. Let's go!